Chapter 21, Transpiration of Heaven and Earth. Ashlock's consciousness snapped back to reality nearly instantly, as if he had suffered from a flashbang or a blow to the head. The air around him felt suffocatingly hot, like a sauna turned up way too high. Opening his non-existent eyes, Ashlock saw the air shimmer from the heat alongside an insane abundance of chi. Ugh! What happened? Ashlock looked around and was amazed to see that most of the pavilion was still standing. Even the runic formation surrounding him survived the fallout of the Grand Elder going supernova. The intricate silvery patterns etched into the gray stone slabs remained mostly undamaged. Ashlock could feel the residual chi rushing around him in a powerful torrent, as if he were at the center of a whirlpool. The energy pulsed and flowed through the formation Stella had set up, filling the air with a crackling energy that was almost tangible. Was this the chi left over from the explosion? Your favorite stories on n/o/v/l.com? Ashlock tried to activate his Eye of the Tree God skill to check out the surroundings, but he found himself unable to. Is this how it feels to get winded as a tree? Luckily, there was chi all around, and not being one to turn down such an opportunity, Ashlock activated his basic meditation and felt his scarlet leaves, which surprisingly survived the heatwave, greedily absorb the ambient energies. He only had one more stage to go until he would forge a soul core and join the ranks of the soul fire cultivators, a step below those godlike beings that had fought only moments ago. Ashlock took a moment to revel in the warmth of chi rushing through his trunk. He directed any excess chi that he couldn't absorb to advance his cultivation down into his roots as his endless tunneling into the mountain's depths in search of treasures continued. While on the topic of utilizing his excess chi, Ashlock thought of his chi fruit production skill as he looked at his branches that had been picked clean. I wonder if I should make more poisonous fruits. While the fruit had proven effective once consumed, Ashlock was uncomfortable with his lack of control over who ate them. He remembered the incident with the bird that had been able to detect the poison. It had been pure chance that the bird had accidentally died after eating a sour fruit and falling to its death. The only direct fatality due to the fruit had been a cultivator who had been careless enough to swallow the fruit without checking for poison. While Ashlock could argue that anyone foolish enough to eat his poisonous fruit deserved what they got, he knew that it was best to avoid using the fruit without a way to communicate their dangers clearly with others. The last thing he needed was for Stella to be distracted and accidentally eat one. Ashlock returned his attention underground as his roots encountered another deposit of that silvery rock, which raised another question. Are these spirit stones? The Grand Elders had clearly placed a lot of value on spirit stones, even willing to wage an all-out war that resulted in the destruction of a town and the death of the Ravenborn Grand Elder. It wasn't hard to understand why. The ambient chi in the air was negligible compared to the amount Ashlock could extract from those silvery rocks. Assuming they were spirit stone ore and not something else entirely. Speaking of the Grand Elders, Ashlock managed to activate his Eye of the Tree God skill and looked at his mountain from above. As previously confirmed, the pavilion he resided in was mostly still standing. However, the side facing the valley had been reduced to rubble. The heatwave had also passed through the training courtyard, leaving charred wooden dummies piled up in a corner that Stella used to train her sword skills. Overall, the damage to the mountain and the pavilion wasn't too catastrophic due to its immense height. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for anything else he could see. The only other mountain peak within Ashlock's vision range was the one controlled by the Ravenborn family. So naturally, as it had been closest to the blast, almost nothing remained apart from a ruin. Charred corpses, barely recognizable as humans, were amongst the rubble that was still glowing red with heat. Even the mountain had changed shape with a large chunk taken out as if a landslide had occurred. Meanwhile, the bit of town he could see. Well, there was nothing there. A volcano might as well have erupted where the Grand Elder had gone supernova without the ash in the air or molten lava everywhere. Speaking of, Ashlock noticed the sky had returned to its usual blue, but the clouds were still gone. Seeing the absolute destruction raised a few issues. What if that old bastard had blown himself up on my mountain while fighting someone? Hell, in the future, maybe Stella would do the same. What then? Would I survive? Unfortunately, Ashlock didn't have the answer, but his mind couldn't help but wonder and simulate solutions. So long as my roots stay alive, I should be able to regrow over time. Right. If that assumption turned out to be accurate, then Ashlock had all the more reason to bury deep and wide with his deep root skill. While inspecting the bubbling pit of fire that had once been a bustling human town only minutes ago, Ashlock decided to summon his sign-in system. All this talk about skills made him feel like trying his luck. Idolatry Daily Sign-in System. Day 2782. Daily credit, 1. Sacrifice credit, 100. Sign in. So much had happened today that it was almost weird to think that not even a day had passed since Ashlock consumed that Reborn cultivator that stripped him clean of his fruit. Of course, 100 credits weren't enough to guarantee an A- grade skill or item, but Stella only left recently, and everything in many miles seems to have died. So I might as well roll. There was a constant balance between hoarding his points to guarantee high draws and spending them whenever he got credits to increase the variety of skills, items, and maybe even summons he had for any given situation. Having a few high-grade skills and items is great, but Ashlock had found a use for even the cheapest credit items he had rolled for, such as the pill bottle. Or the more mid-range skills like chi fruit production, which was a C-grade skill yet had so many uses and had led to many interesting situations. Taking a deep non-existent breath and containing his excitement, Ashlock told the system to sign in. Sign in successful, 101 credits consumed. Upgraded basic meditation F- transpiration of heaven and earth C. New meditation technique. And it's an upgrade. Of course, Ashlock had seen some of his skills upgrade before, such as his fire and lightning resistance skills. But that had been due to outside influence rather than the system's direct input. So it seems the system can upgrade my current skills rather than constantly giving me new ones. Ashlock removed the useless thoughts and focused on his brand new skill. He was eager to discover what it could do, especially since it apparently upgraded his meditation technique, which had been so unbelievably garbage before at the F grade. It took Ashlock over an hour to comprehend the information of his new skill, mostly because he was no biologist and tree terminology combined with an ancient Chinese-style breathing technique clearly wasn't supposed to be understood by his puny mind. But it basically boiled down to this. Summoning the skill on his menu, Ashlock decided to collect his thoughts and summarize his findings. Transpiration of heaven and earth C. The first part of the technique's name, transpiration, refers to the process by which moisture, water, is carried through the tree from the roots to small pores on the underside of leaves. There it changes into vapor and is released into the atmosphere. Basically, the way a tree breathes. Something Ashlock had been doing naturally from the moment he was born into this world as a sapling, just like how a human baby knows instinctually how to breathe. From watching Stella, Ashlock confirmed that cultivators of this world invented breathing techniques that allowed them to absorb the ambient chi by enhancing their breathing. Ashlock wasn't sure how his previous meditation technique functioned, but considering how garbage it was debatable whether it even did anything. However, his new skill was an actual breathing technique specialized for trees. And then comes the exciting part. The heaven and earth in the skill's name. In mythology, there are many trees. Some are even referred to as world trees because they become so tall they literally connect the heaven and earth through their vast branches and extensive roots. This skill, transpiration of heaven and earth, may only be a C-grade skill, but with a few more upgrades, I will be on my way to becoming this world's new world tree. Ashlock could only laugh at himself. He had been thinking of cultivating like Stella and chasing pointless things like immortality when he was already immortal. Instead, Ashlock should have set his sights on the goal of all trees. To become so tall, he can literally reach for the stars. Ashlock focused within himself and activated his new meditation technique. The relentless raging storm of chi that brewed within his trunk that Ashlock had always struggled to control became a calm lake. One so still, even the slightest disturbance would send ripples through it. It was relaxing. A headache he didn't even know he had was washed away, and now he was utterly tranquil. There was a moment of calm, but then Ashlock activated the next stage of the technique. If the first stage had been the equivalent of sitting down in a cross-legged pose and readying his mind, the second stage was when he breathed in. Chi was greedily brought up his roots, something that hadn't been possible before. Ashlock tried to suppress his turbulent mind that was overly excited, thinking about the possibility that this new breathing technique brought him. Those silver rock deposits now had great value as Ashlock felt their chi flood his calm lake. However, before the lake could overflow, the excess chi that he couldn't absorb was brought up toward his branches and eventually expelled through his leaves. No more did Ashlock have to frantically direct excess chi into his roots or fruit. He now had a reliable way to expel the excess chi. But that was not all. The technique encompassed both heaven and earth. So if his roots brought chi from the earth, then Ashlock's leaves naturally obtained chi from the heavens. The violent ambient chi captured by the runic formation rushing around Ashlock in a torrent was suddenly drawn toward his leaves. The chi trickled in, slow and steady, But with all his leaves combined, there were soon streams of chi flowing through his branches and pooling into the lake. Ashlock panicked for a second as the lake overflowed, but it seemed intentional as the chi trickled down to his roots, helping them grow. So it was an endless cycle of chi being brought up from the earth, expelled into the surroundings, and then ambient chi being brought back in and trickling down to the roots. Ashlock had become a link between heaven and earth. Time passed. Day turned into night, and before Ashlock knew it, he was bathing in the sun's morning light. He felt relaxed as he exercised his technique. He could now understand why cultivators remained motionless and cultivated for months. It was better than going to a spa. All he wanted to do was cultivate and sleep for the next 100 years. But before he could close his eyes, the door to the pavilion slammed open, and an all-too-familiar girl with raven black hair and blue flames stumbled in while, clutching her arm. Diana Ravenborn had somehow survived the Grand Elder's explosion. Chapter 22, Interlude, Nascent Soul. Diana knew a secret. One nobody else in the Ravenborn family was privy to, including the other family elders. Even her deceased elder brother never learned of this secret, as the man, her father, had gone to extensive lengths to keep the truth of his cultivation a secret. Her old man, the Grand Elder of House Ravenborn, was not a mere Star Core realm cultivator. Instead, he had secretly ascended to the realm above and was now a nascent soul. But he had only ascended this year and was, therefore, still consolidating his new realm's foundations, and right now, he was weaker than he was before ascension. But even with his weakness, it was an accomplishment that would be hailed in the Celestial Empire and Righteous Empires as an outstanding achievement. Diana's father would be promoted to a defender of the great empire against the beast tides and could enjoy a near-immortal life of endless prestige and luxury. But out here, in the depths of the wilderness, where savages and castaway families fought over limited resources, as they say, the tallest trees attracted the greatest tribulations. Would all the other families, especially the patriarch, allow a nascent soul cultivator to parade around their sect, flaunting their divine power for all to see? No, they would want it for themselves. Jealousy leads to spite, but fear leads to a sword through the back and an early grave. In the chi realm, a mortal slowly gathers the world's energy to prepare their body to ascend their mortal shell. At this stage, one can use internalized chi to empower their bodies to break boulders with their bare hands. Next is the Soul Forge realm, where the world weeds out the weak from the strong. Cultivators attempt to solidify their souls into a core with their enhanced bodies. As Diana carved through the relentless ice of the avalanche with the evergreen cultivator hot on her tail, she felt her soul core burn as blue flames poured from her hands and down her sword, letting her cut through the ice as if it was butter. She could hear her father battling in the distant skies. Yet, even this far away, she could feel the immense gravity surrounding all Star Core cultivators. Their soul cores had become so dense after decades of cultivation that they had evolved into miniature stars, giving the cultivator a near unlimited source of chi. In fact, their soul cores were so dense they had their own gravitational field. The cultivator could naturally tone down the effect, but no matter what, anything in their presence, man or furniture, would have to resist some pressure. And when those godlike Star Core cultivators unleashed their powers to the max and turned off the suppression of their own soul, they could levitate into the air with the assistance of spiritual artifacts such as flying swords. Something Diana hoped to do one day. Assuming she survived. Clangs of swords thundered throughout the valley, causing the ground to tremble and Diana to briefly stumble before catching herself. Honestly, it was looking bleak. The Ravenborn family was larger than the Evergreen and Winterwrath families combined, but decades of mediocre talents had caused the Ravenborns to be very top-heavy with their influence. Eventually, the old would die out. It may take decades or even centuries, but with nobody to replace them, the Ravenborn family was doomed to fall. So Diana ran as far as she could. Her family was doomed, and she refused to stay aboard a sinking vessel. Diana could see the border of Darklight City only a couple meters away. Her insides felt on fire as her soul core began to leak and break. So close. Diana felt a hand clasp her shoulder with such force it crushed her bones to dust. Before she could even scream in pain, Wayne Evergreen's full weight slammed into her back like a rampaging bull, pinning her to the ground. Frozen mud dug into her face like shards of glass, and she groaned. Diana gasped for breath as she was winded by the blow, her vision blurred from her head smacking some ice on the way down. Her body went into total shock, and her overused soul core refused to comply with her pleas, instead choosing to go dormant. She was royally fucked. Fucking bitch, just stay down. Wayne Evergreen snarled as he locked his limbs around Diana and activated a martial technique. The ground rumbled as stone and rock surfaced, while a depression in the earth formed around Diana, causing her to slowly sink into the ground, as if she was being buried alive in a stone coffin. Once the stone coffin was sealed and Wayne was sure there was no way for the weakened Diana to escape, he collapsed on the coffin's cold stone with heavy breaths. Wiping the sweat from his brow, a grin formed on the young man's face. His father had promised a hefty reward to anyone who captured Diana Reborn, and if Wayne wanted to get the spotlight back from his newlywed sister, this was precisely what he needed. Deciding to make sure nothing could go wrong, the young man used his last bit of energy to cover the coffin in vines, and then with a satisfied smile, he slumped to the ground. The sounds of fighting between the elders became a calming melody that Wayne relaxed to as he daydreamed about his future surrounded by spirit stones and compliments from his family. Looking up at the blue sky, Wayne felt beyond relieved, until his heart practically jumped out of his chest. He was currently a few meters down, surrounded by two ice walls on either side that Diana had carved out. But there was a face peeking over the edge, one he didn't wish to see. "Cousin." The square-faced man with venomous eyes smiled, casting a shadow on the ice tunnel below. "How kind of you to keep the prize warm for me." "Back off, Tristan." Wayne snarled as he shakily stood up by pushing on the stone coffin behind him. Wayne's body felt awful after he chugged those cheap healing pills, and his soul core was on the verge of shattering. His golden ring flashed with power and a sword appeared in his hand, but it felt heavy and cold in his limp grip. Tristan casually dropped into the tunnel, landing perfectly on his feet, and eyed his cousin with a curious smile. "Why do you look so distraught to see me, Wayne? There's no need to fight over petty things like this, right?" Wayne gritted his teeth and shuffled his feet into a wide stance as green flames flickered to life around his hands, which earned him a chuckle from Tristan. "Wayne. Drop it. You can't beat me at your best. And certainly not at your worst." Green flames roared to life, turning Tristan into a column of green fire and illuminating the ice tunnel in its sickly neon light. Wayne saw the reflections of his cousin's flames dance around him across the magical ice. No matter where he turned, he couldn't escape its shadows. Despite his cousin's calm smile, Wayne knew this was the end. There were no witnesses, and nobody would question his death when demigods fought overhead. A stray attack from them was enough to end his puny existence. It had been a trap all along. Not only would Tristan get the reward from his father, but Tristan would also increase his position in the family with his death. But perhaps most tragic of all, the bastard would steal all the cultivation resources he had been saving up in his ring for years. Tristan summoned a short sword to his hand and looked at it casually while rubbing his finger on its ornate handle. "You know, Wayne, I never really liked you." Wayne scoffed, "No shit." Tristan shook his head, No, cousin, you don't understand." Tristan took steady steps forward. His eyes were dull as the short sword lazily hung in his grasp, dripping in green flames. His smile had turned to a frown as his boots crunched on the icy mud. "I really dislike you. In fact, I often dreamed of cutting you up into little pieces and feasting on your flesh. You sick bastard." Wayne spat. Tristan's frown turned into a sickly smile. "Then I would hunt your sister and her pathetic husband." Tristan imitated a cutting motion across his neck, "And once she is on the floor squealing like a pig with a slit throat, I can go after the rest of your filthy little family that dares to rule over the side branches." The two evergreens locked eyes. Not another word was spoken, but both knew there was no going back now. A duel to the death had been silently agreed upon. Tristan moved first, shooting across the clearing. Wayne raised his sword a second too late and deflected awkwardly with the hilt rather than the blade. Usually, Wayne would be strong enough to keep his hold, but his hand was limp with fatigue, so the blow sent his sword flying out of his hand and embedding into the opposite wall of ice. Wayne closed his eyes as his cousin sneered and, with a swift strike, decapitated Wayne with ease. The dense green flames shrouding Tristan's form died down as he casually walked up to his cousin's lifeless head and kicked it away. It cracked like an egg on his boot as he forgot to control his strength. "Disgusting." Tristan shook his foot in a vain attempt to remove the red stains. With a sigh, his eyes wandered to the stone coffin. He smiled, and his short sword vanished from his hand as he walked over. But his happiness was short-lived. He had been drowning out the clashes of swords from overhead, but now they had ceased. Did someone win? Tristan tilted his head as he spread out his spiritual sense in an attempt to gauge the victor. All he got back was a blinding light. A ball of such dense chi like a miniature sun seemed to be preparing to explode. Tristan almost rubbed his eyes in disbelief. There was no way a Star Core cultivator would willingly go supernova unless they stood absolutely no chance. Tristan paled as realization dawned on him. The Ravenborn Grand Elder was no star core cultivator. He had definitely become a nascent soul, meaning the Ravenborn Grand Elder about to go supernova was merely his clone. If he could locate the Ravenborn Grand Elder's true soul, which would be without a vessel, he could absorb the soul of a nascent soul cultivator, which would propel him to the star core realm overnight. Greed flashed through the young man's eyes, but his causal composure crumbled. Either he stayed and guarded the trapped Diana Ravenborn to retrieve a prize from his father, or he left here and went hunting for a defenseless nascent soul. Gritting his teeth, Tristan left the coffin and dashed down the tunnel with all his defensive artifacts activating simultaneously and dense green flames to protect him. There was no way he would let such a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity slip by. Diana lost consciousness due to the pain, but when she came to, she was greeted with darkness and a musky scent. The air was dry and hot, her lips felt dry, and her mouth was parched. Where? She groggily croaked out as she reached up with her hand. Ow! Her hand reeled back in pain from touching the red-hot rock and her brain snapped awake. Finding her soul core was half full, she deduced that a few hours had passed. Gotta get out of here. She punched up, covering her fist in wrathful flames, and the rock practically crumbled to dust, not due to her strength or chi, but rather because the stone was just that brittle. Diana gasped for fresh air but instantly regretted it. Boiling steam blasted into her face, and she could only see chi-dense steam in all directions. Empowering her legs, Diana jumped up, and her jaw hung open in shock. A large chunk of Darklight City that had been her playground throughout her childhood was gone. Instead, as far as the eye could see, a desolate wasteland of molten rock stretched out, flat like the great deserts in the north. Diana's heart beat loudly in her chest as she turned midair and saw the Ravenborn peak. Her home was destroyed. Obliterated. Gone. Did father go supernova? Diana wondered. It was a common tactic for nascent soul cultivators to blow up their clones when they got outmatched. However, even if they didn't truly die, they would have to find a vessel and start cultivation again from a much lower realm. It was basically a death sentence. She had never felt so free. With her father likely dead, endless possibilities stretched out before her. Landing on the burning ground, Diana had to decide what to do now. Her body was in great pain, her left arm hung limply at her side, which limited her options. Searching the molten landscape, Diana muttered, "Father's soul will be discovered soon. Unfortunately, I am already too late to claim it for myself. So where can I go?" Darklight City was too risky, and her family's pavilion was gone. None of the other families would house her, and surrounding the sect was a wilderness overflowing with monsters she was unprepared to face in her current condition. While her mind spun to find a solution, Diana's wandering eyes paused on a distant mountain peak. The steam from the melting ice partially obscured it, but it gave Diana a great idea. Stella Crestfallen was out of the sect, so her peak was currently unoccupied. There was no way anyone would go looking for her there. Right. Deciding there was no better option, blue flames coated Diana's legs, and she dashed forward. The journey ended up taking far longer than expected. Due to the flattened land from the explosion, Diana had to regularly lay low as Evergreen and Winterwrath cultivators that had survived the supernova moved around in groups, searching for Ravenborn survivors like a flock of vultures. By the time she had climbed Crestfallen Peak, she was out of breath, and it was the start of a new day. The doors were surprisingly unlocked, and Diana stumbled in. Wiping sweat from her brow, she looked straight forward, and through a door leading to the central courtyard, she caught sight of a tree. Her brows furrowed in confusion. Did it always look that ominous? Chapter 23, Suspicion. Diana trudged into the central courtyard and seemed to be eyeing Ashlock warily. Her brows were furrowed as if the sight of him baffled the badly beaten and bruised cultivator. She circled him a single time, eyes narrowed and dragging her feet with every step. Eventually, she flopped down to the grass beside the tree, crossed her legs, and began cultivating after swallowing a few pills. A while passed with nothing happening, and Ashlock let out a non-existent breath he didn't know he was holding. It had been a stressful few days. Ashlock had no clue how Diana Ravenborn survived the Grand Elder's explosion, but that didn't matter. What he needed to do first and foremost while Diana was distracted was decide his stance on the situation. How should he treat the intruder? His opinion of the girl was neutral. When they first met, she snooped around his courtyard for clues about something likely relating to Stella. That made Ashlock naturally wary of her, but then she killed her cousin, noticed his existence as a spirit tree, and was nice enough to leave the body for him to eat without chopping him down for spiritual firewood. She then took the pill bottle and the storage ring containing his fruit, but she had no idea the ring carried fruit when she stole it from her dead cousin's finger. And Diana also didn't know the pills had belonged to him. What tree owned pills anyways? So was Diana sly and untrustworthy? Yes, without question. Before she left her mountain peak, Ashlock overheard Diana's mother asking about a special mission Diana had been given by the now dead Grand Elder. That was very suspicious and likely involved Stella again somehow. But he had no proof. For all he knew, the special mission could be entirely unrelated to her previous snooping around the pavilion. Also, she was ruthless and maybe a little psychopathic. Executing her cousin without asking questions first and then leaving the dead body for a demonic tree to eat was far from normal behavior, even with his knowledge of how the demonic cultivators acted. But despite her flaws, she had taken him on an unknowing tour of the town that was now nothing but a puddle of molten slag and showed an acceptable demeanor and good fighting sense compared to the evergreen cultivators. So other than some wariness around her motives and character, she seemed like an alright person. And there was also the simple fact that Ashlock's opinions on the girl ultimately didn't matter. Even in her injured state, his devour skill would likely only anger her, and there was no way she would consume a poisonous fruit unless she was somehow as dumb as her cousin. So Ashlock was simply out of options and would have to put up with her presence until she either left or Stella returned. Ashlock watched Diana cultivate for a bit, and a thought crossed his mind. Could she help train Stella for her upcoming Grand Elder examination? Ashlock was still distraught for Stella. After seeing the godlike fight between the Grand Elders, I worry that Stella will struggle to pass the exam, even with a few more years out in the wilderness. She simply lacks a teacher. Ashlock wasn't oblivious to the fact Stella had practically raised herself. Apart from venturing down the mountain on a rare occasion for supplies, Stella kept to herself and silently cultivated and practiced up here on the mountain peak. She lacked a teacher. Something he could never provide, as she often taught him things. Not like I can speak anyways. Ashlock hadn't seen Stella fight in many years and had no idea how she compared to Diana, so maybe she would be a secret prodigy, and Diana wouldn't be able to teach her anything. Ashlock paused at the distant memory of the first time he saw Stella fight. The two men who had freaked out when they saw the head pulled from the bag had utilized blue flames while fighting her. Were they Ravenborn servants? Why had they freaked out like that over the head anyway? Who was the guy? Many questions and a disturbing lack of answers. Actually, now that Ashlock thought about it some more, each family seemed to have a color of flames associated with them. Was that due to a family martial art technique? Or was the color of one's soul flames determined from birth? Could a cultivator change the color of their flames? Ashlock wished he could venture down to a library or ask to train under someone to get a better understanding of cultivators in this world. I'm getting off topic, aren't I? Right. Back to the blue flame cultivators. Ashlock gazed at Diana, who was cultivating beside him. She had blue flames flickering across her body as she healed her wounds, and so had the other Ravenborn family members. Which led Ashlock to a disturbing thought. Had her family tried to assassinate Stella? It was too early to draw conclusions. When Stella had nearly been poisoned by that servant, the two cultivators she fought off later that night had red and black flames. It may be a coincidence that those cultivators that attacked Stella all those years ago had blue flames. In fact, Ashlock couldn't even remember the exact shade of the flames. Were they light blue or a darker tone like Diana's? Ashlock cursed. If only his stupid system had unlocked faster, he might have gotten his Eye of the Tree God and Language of the World skills before the incident, and then he would have understood what was happening through their conversations. Even his vision would have been improved. Everything was blurry back then, like looking through a plane of frosted glass. So, in conclusion, I have almost zero information about this girl, and I think her family wants to kill Stella. Ashlock picked at his memories for a few hours, and a conversation came to mind. Stella told me she killed the scion of House Ravenborn in a duel with the help of her new earrings I gifted her. Well, now Ashlock had discovered a potential motive for why both House Ravenborn and maybe Diana, in particular, may despise Stella's existence. Ashlock's mind felt trigger happy on the Devour skill for the rest of the day. Idolatry Daily Sign in System. Day, 2784. Daily Credit, 2. Sacrifice Credit, 0. Sign in. Ashlock awoke the next day to his usual sign in notification. Briefly dismissing it into the corner of his mind, the young demonic tree examined his surroundings. Although half destroyed by the Grand Elder's blast, the courtyard was in good form. It was the 6th month of the year, So summer was in full swing with all the pleasantries that came along with it. The sky was blue, the clouds fluffy, and the warm sun shone on his scarlet leaves. There was just one thing to dampen his mood: an uninvited guest. Diana stood up and stretched. She wore odd clothing that didn't match the era, a pair of black jeans and a white shirt with an undone top button. Her raven hair was short and hung casually over her gray eyes. Honestly, she reminded Ashlock of a modern teenager from Earth going through a tomboyish emo phase, but considering she could shoot flames out her sword and cut avalanches in two, she could act and dress however she darn well pleased. She rolled up her shirt sleeves and inspected her arms, likely for any lingering bruises or cuts she had failed to heal overnight. Then, rolling her shoulders, she walked around the courtyard, studying the runic formations as she went. She seemed baffled, not by its runes but rather by its purpose. Read latest chapters on no/v/e/lb and com. Is that girl crazy? Diana huffed and crossed her arms. Mumbling to herself, Diana stroked her chin while looking straight at a certain ominous tree. Such an expensive formation, yet almost all the captured chi is lost because it was built outdoors. Is that girl just stupid or? Her eyes seemed to follow the flow of the ambient chi like a curious girl watching a fish swim by. She followed it, walking toward the center of the formation, and stopping just a step away from Ashlock. She seemed to pause as she frowned at the ground. My cousin's body is already gone. There is no way a demonic tree could eat him and his clothes that fast. Did a vulture get to it? Looking up, she furrowed her brows. No, the canopy would have hidden the corpse from the sky. Drumming her fingers on her chin, the girl seemed deep in thought. Sadly, Ashlock was no mind reader, so he just sat. Stood. Swayed. Ashlock had no clue about the proper term. Being a human mind in a tree was sometimes confusing. But only sometimes. He rather liked his new body. Diana seemed to come to a conclusion as she looked at his naked branches, devoid of any fruit. You should be a demonic tree sapling, yet there are no poisonous berries on your branches, nor are there any fruit. So where did my cousin get that? Her thoughts seemed to wander again. Ashlock found it odd to be learning about his fellow demonic trees. Spirit trees aren't that rare in this world, as most people that had interacted with him seemed mostly uninterested. Am I like a Venus flytrap to them? I used to like feeding dead flies to mine back at home. Now Ashlock felt silly. Here he was as a man-eating tree, but in this dog-eat-dog world, a murderous magical tree was about as interesting as some dumb plant that took days to digest a single insect. Diana reached her hand out, and Ashlock felt the familiar feeling of invasive chi flooding his trunk. He couldn't hide his chi in the corner of his body, hoping she wouldn't find him because, well, there was a massive spiritual lake of chi floating in the middle of his trunk. It was rather hard to miss. To Ashlock's surprise, Diana was rather respectful. Her chi never went too close to his spiritual lake, and her prying only lasted a minute before she pulled her hand back. Her eyes narrowed. How did it change so much in just 2 days? That should be impossible. I have never seen a spirit tree progress so fast. As flattering as her statements were, Ashlock feared he had been found out. Chapter 24, New Neighbors. Diana was confused. But the pieces were coming together. Slowly but surely, the odd setup of Red Vine Peak was beginning to make sense. Of course, the demonic spirit tree was the center of all this nonsense. How had it grown so fast over 2 days? The runic formation clearly played a role. The ambient chi surrounding the tree was absolutely ridiculous. It rivaled some of the secret realms she had visited in the past. There was also a horrifying thought. What if the tree had eaten her cousin in only a single day? Diana had ventured out of the sect and into the wilderness numerous times. Out there, dead beast corpses sometimes caused the birth of a spirit tree. Spirit trees were nothing special, considered barely sentient plants at best. However, some alchemists did grow them to use their fruit in concoctions far beyond Diana's understanding. Is Stella an alchemist? Is that why she is taking such care of a demonic tree? Diana tapped her chin. It made some sense. But they could only help produce poisons, as the demonic tree's berries were quite potent, strong enough for chi-empowered beasts to die within minutes. Deciding that, in the end, it didn't matter, Diana shrugged and sat down on the bench below the demonic tree. The chi here was very dense. Not only would it aid in her cultivation, but the ambient chi would also obscure her from wandering spiritual senses from people looking for her. But with her father dead and her family mostly wiped out and scattered throughout the valley, she was free to do as she liked. But having a plan was always important. Either I stay here in the Blood Lotus sect, or I hitch a ride with the merchants and go somewhere else. That idea terrified her, naturally, as the scion of House Ravenborn. She had never wandered too far from the sect. And the idea of traversing the wilderness with those crazy strong merchants, just to join another demonic sect that she knew nobody at, seemed daunting. But how can I stay here in the Blood Lotus sect after my family's downfall? There were a few options, but none were that great. Should I take the promotion exam to become a Grand Elder in a few years? A thin smile appeared on the girl's face. She had nothing left except the clothes on her back and the stuff in her 2 spatial rings. She was basically homeless. One of the spatial rings wasn't even hers and was just filled with chi-dense fruit from God knows where. Cheat the latest novels on no/v/elben/c/ohm. It wasn't looking too good. Diana needed a place to quietly cultivate, heal from her injuries and prepare to become a Grand Elder of the Blood Lotus sect. With a sigh, Diana summoned a beast core from her spatial ring. The palm-sized item looked like a rotting heart but was actually odorless and felt like holding a pebble. Grimacing, Diana chucked the beast core into her mouth and began to cycle her cultivation technique. There was an explosion of chi throughout her body as a week's worth of chi that she could achieve through breathing techniques filled her entire body, replenishing her weary soul core and revitalizing her flesh. However, she had to be careful. Consuming too many beast cores led to rapid progression but had diminishing returns and caused heart demons to fester. The line between man and beast was more blurred than many felt comfortable admitting. Moreover, her cultivation method of absorbing beast cores for rapid advancement would lead her to be called a monster and savage in the Celestial Empire, so trying to live there was also a no-go. Closing her eyes, Diana entered a deep state of meditation. As Diana stopped investigating him and focused back on her cultivation, Ashlock felt relieved. It seemed even with his ridiculous advancement and all the other peculiarities around him, Diana simply didn't care. Ashlock was a little annoyed the girl was cultivating in his personal space, but the amount of chi she absorbed from the surroundings was negligible compared to the total collected by the runic formation. That supernova had contained the accumulated and refined chi of a star core cultivator. Even with the explosion happening so far away, Ashlock had never felt the air so heavy with the stuff. It was like smog, forever lingering around. With nothing else to do, Ashlock decided to continue cultivating himself as he didn't know how long this chi would last. Was it a temporary thing, or would the area be saturated in the stuff for hundreds of years to come? Activating the transpiration of heaven and earth, chi flowed through the leaves and down into the lake. While simultaneously, chi was drawn up from the earth, up his roots and trunk, and finally breathed out through his leaves. It gave Ashlock a magical feeling as his body began to grow, and he could feel his cultivation advancing. A few days passed. Ashlock could not sleep with someone cultivating so close beside him, but he could enter a meditative trance. In this state, time flowed exceptionally fast, but not instantly. In a way, he preferred this as he was somewhat aware of his surroundings. And exciting things were occurring, not within the courtyard of Red Vine Peak as Diana had remained motionless, but rather in the wasteland that was once the town. On this particular day, Ashlock decided to do some spying around as he had seen more activity than in the last few days. Eye of the Tree God brought Ashlock high into the sky, away from his home, and allowed him to venture forth as nothing but an observer. If not for this skill, Ashlock feared he may have gone mad and thought of the courtyard and the pavilion as his prison. Or would he? His mindset had certainly changed on many things along with his biology. Due to his skill's view range and speed, he soared past his mountain peak faster than any bird or plane, yet it still took him a few minutes. It was hard to describe how enormous Red Vine Peak and the old Ravenborn mountain truly were. Ashlock had never seen Mount Everest in person, but he wouldn't be surprised if they were similar sizes. It made sense that the cultivators rarely left their mountain peaks to interact with the mortals in the towns down below. And on the flip side, it made sense why the mortals never ventured up to the mountain peaks. Ashlock doubted an average human could even get to the top without the help of a cultivator. On the neighboring mountain peak, Ashlock could see how the top had been shaved flat. It was certainly not natural, almost as if a cultivator had taken their sword and sliced the tip clean off. Which was likely what had actually happened. The flat space was huge, easily enough to fit a few football stadiums or an entire airport with room to spare. However, Ashlock found it hard to picture how this flat bit of rock had once been the Ravenborn family pavilion, which was big enough to house thousands of people. And now it was all gone. Even the rubble and corpses had been cleared. Instead, the mountain peak was alive with activity. Green and white flame cultivators mingled in groups and seemed to be constructing a new palace in the skies. Ashlock could practically see the chi in the air, it was that dense. The cultivators appeared to be bickering over the best way to build the new pavilion, but up here wasn't the true hub of activity. No, for that Ashlock had to go to the site of the old town. It had only been around a week since the Grand Elder went supernova and turned the town into a molten wasteland, yet it was already unrecognizable. Nature was in full overdrive, likely due to the dense chi in the air, and the charred miserable land of a few days ago was gone and replaced with a beautiful meadow teeming with life. Now I see why this entire world isn't a wasteland. After witnessing the might of the cultivators, Ashlock had wondered why the entire world wasn't a place of split mountains, burned down forests, and rivers of corpses. But if nature recovers this quickly, and the cultivators and mortals with a little chi live for so long, then it's no wonder life hasn't gone extinct yet. On the old town's lands, which has now become an overgrown meadow, Ashlock could see thousands of mortals excitedly hauling logs and stones from God knows where and building a brand new town. None of them seemed distraught about the fact they were building upon the vaporized remains of hundreds, if not thousands, of people that had called this land home. A few cultivators stood to the side and told people where they could build while pocketing some coins from the people. Honestly, it was so hilariously corrupt that Ashlock couldn't take it seriously. The cultivators simply didn't give a single fuck except for themselves. Ashlock spent a few more hours watching the people before deciding to call it for the day. He still got tired when the sun dipped down, but luckily he could keep cultivating at night time now. As he sat there in a groggy state with the cool summer night breeze rustling his leaves, Ashlock looked forward to the future. If he had to guess based on absolutely no information other than his gut feeling, he would be forming his soul core within a few weeks. And Stella would return in less than a year. So, assuming nothing went wrong with the Winterwrath and evergreen folk moving in next door, life looked rather pleasant for the foreseeable future. Now, if only Diana could stop being a useless squatter and get him some snacks. Chapter 25, Dark Truth. Idolatry Daily Sign in System. Day, 2846. Daily Credit, 64. Sacrifice Credit, 60. Sign in. Progress was slower than expected on the cultivation front. Based on no information other than his gut feeling, Ashlock had estimated it would take another few weeks to form his soul core. There was just a slight issue. Ashlock had no idea what a soul core even looked like, let alone how to develop one. Did he need to unlock another technique? Something like soul core creation? Days had turned into weeks, which had then turned into months, 2 months, to be exact. Cultivation was going fine. The dense ambient chi had yet to dissipate much, and surprisingly Diana was generous in the snack department. She had opted to shoot down passing birds for food, since he was refusing to grow any more fruit. She stripped the corpses of edible meat and gave him the rest of the carcass and any leftover organs. Due to the meat being removed, the sacrificial credits gained from each bird were negligible, but she hunted around 2 a day, so they added up over time. Here is another one, you glutton. Diana dumped a bird skeleton that had been stripped clean beside the bench, which she practically collapsed on in exhaustion. Her shirt was stained with sweat, and she breathed heavily while a training sword lay against her leg. Ashlock didn't know if Diana was a training freak or a workaholic, but he swore she cultivated in her sleep and then practiced techniques from sunup until sundown. Not a single moment was wasted, something he could respect as it motivated him to do something. It was hard to be a slothful tree when someone right next to you was working until they almost passed out every day. Never one to say no to a free meal, Ashlock cast Devour, and black vines shot out from the ground and crushed the corpse into smithereens before absorbing the nutrients, if there was any left, and some lingering chi. Due to the lack of meat and his new cultivation technique being so powerful, Ashlock barely even noticed the bird's chi drip into his inner lake. +1 SC. But the extra credits were always welcomed. Unlike Stella, Diana seemed to show only the slightest interest in him, only speaking every once in a while, never opening up about anything particularly interesting. It was a shame. They had spent 2 months together, and Ashlock was just starting to tolerate her existence. She did odd things, like eating these awful-looking rocks that reeked of slightly wrong chi. It was hard to describe what was exactly wrong with it, but it just felt contaminated. Maybe it was some kind of cultivator drug. In novels, the protagonists often referred to cultivators as junkies with how many drugs they took to empower their bodies. The ironic thing is that drugs make you live longer here rather than serving as a quick path to financial and physical death. With his meal consumed and his thoughts wandering, Ashlock decided to observe Diana again. She often used the central courtyard to train, likely because it was the collection point for all the ambient chi. Day 50 of trying to work out how the hell to form a soul core, Ashlock muttered to nobody but himself as he intently watched Diana. With no teacher, Ashlock just hoped to gain even the slightest slither of insight from his observations. He had overfilled his lake and expanded it many times. It was now around twice as large as it had been when Ashlock formed it 2 months ago, but that was still not enough. He had tried to compress it into a ball shape, but that had been a futile endeavor as the chi simply dissipated rather than condensed. Diana raised her sword, summoning her dark blue flame that flickered across the blade. She then slashed at the air, keeping her eyes set on the horizon. The arc her sword drew was beautiful, and her footwork was fluid like a dancer as she performed a flurry of attacks. That is one thing Ashlock had noticed. Stella and Diana applied cultivation in different ways. If he had to describe Diana in a single word, it would be fluid, like water. Whereas Stella was instantaneous, like lightning. How the two compared, or who would win in a fight, was undecided, but Ashlock feared he may soon find out. Diana showed no signs of leaving, and Ashlock doubted Stella would be thrilled to find a squatter in her pavilion when she returned. The afternoon went lazily by. Ashlock gave up watching Diana after a while and scratched his head over the soul core issue until a shout startled him. Stella crestfallen. "We are representatives of the Winterwrath family, and we have come to make a deal." A deep masculine voice thundered from the entrance to the pavilion. Ashlock cursed as he quickly activated his Eye of the Tree God skill. How did I not feel him coming? I should find a solution to that. In the past, Ashlock had awoken naturally when a powerful cultivator appeared. Why had that changed? Was it because he was already awake? Or was the dense ambient chi messing with his senses? For now, that didn't matter. 2 men dressed in sleeveless white robes stood at the closed and bolted doors. If Ashlock had to describe their look, it would be albino Vikings. Their short hair and eyebrows were chalky white, and their eyes were a deep red. If not for their muscular appearance, like bodybuilders, and the fact they stood under the sun, Ashlock would believe they were vampires. Were there vampires and other mystical races in this world? So far, he had only seen humans and heard rumors of a beast tide which didn't sound like it included elves and dwarfs. Stella crestfallen, you are under protection from the Patriarch. We won't lay a hand on you. The man closest to the door cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted. Hey! You didn't tell me Stella crestfallen lived here. The one who stood further back hissed just loud enough for his accomplice to hear. They said she had some weird artifact that let her kill everyone she faced in a tournament a while ago. The man turned from shouting at the door and placed a hand on his friend's tense shoulder. Relax, Eric, the artifact only allows her to incapacitate one person at a time. So you just need to hold her stare for a second while I deal with her. Eric practically rolled his eyes. Are you stupid? Please tell me you are joking. Then, seeing his friend's unfaltering smile, Eric threw his hands up. And who told you this secret fact I have never heard of? Is someone trying to set your muscle brain up? Eleanor would never do such a thing. The man looked very offended, and even Ashlock was rolling his non-existent eyes. She has a heart of gold that could melt even my. Shush. Eric held his lips shut. Not another word out of you, lover boy. We are leaving. The man smacked Eric's hand away and huffed, if I get this Stella bitch to come with me, Eleanor said she would dual cultivate with me. There was a long silence, which was broken by Eric laughing his lungs out. That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. You and the Ice Queen Eleanor dual cultivating? Not even a pig would want to fuck your dumb ass. Eric was practically wiping tears from his eyes. What does the cold-hearted beauty need with Stella, though? Pill furnace. The man said flatly. Eric stopped mid-laugh and instantly scowled. Now, that is something I can't agree with, and you know that. Turning a person into a pill furnace is vile, Mike. Even for a demonic cultivator, that is a new low. Eleanor hit a bottleneck. Mike shrugged. And you know how hard it is to find human pill furnaces these days. The Grand Elders took them all a long time ago. Mike's face then darkened. Do you even know why Stella Crestfallen is so favored by the Patriarch? It's because he needs a pill. Ashlock's jaw would have dropped if he still had one, and his hatred for cultivators increased tenfold. The Patriarch had seemed like a reasonable fellow who was honoring Stella's dead relatives that sacrificed themselves for him to survive in the past. But really, he just saw Stella's value as a pill furnace. Eric covered his ears and shouted nonsense to himself, can't hear you. I know nothing. Oh, would you look at the setting sun. Crazy how time flies, gotta go. Eric practically shot down the mountain as a ball of white flames. Knee updates at novel/Ben.com. Mike scoffed, watched his friend leave, and turned back to the still-shut pavilion doors with clenched fists. He seemed hesitant to enter, but considering how Eric reacted to the information, the guy likely had little choice but to complete the mission if he wanted to stay alive. Knowing the secrets of someone powerful enough to rule over this many savage cultivators was likely not a man the small-time Winterwrath cultivator could escape from. Ashlock pivoted his view and saw Diana hiding behind his trunk. Was she scared of this guy? Why was she hiding like that? Oh woman, don't use me as a shield. Go fight this dude. Mike cracked his neck to the side and rolled his shoulders as white flames materialized around his fists. Punching the air was enough to send the doors flying off their hinges. Strolling in like he owned the place, Mike glanced around the desolate courtyard. With Stella leaving and Diana having little interest in keeping the place tidy, nature had run its course. The turbulent winds one would experience at the peak of a high mountain had battered the walls. The red vines that grew everywhere that gave the Red Vine Peak its name had become overgrown to the point that some of the white pavilion walls were buried under a blanket of red. Dust caked everything, and the place almost looked haunted. Mike stepped forward with noticeable reluctance, looking left and right down the corridor. On the far side of the welcome hall was an opening to the central courtyard. Mike could only see the base of a tree surrounded by a massive runic formation which seemed to confuse him. Summoning a short sword to his left hand and a shield covered in engraved runes like an art piece to his right. His breathing slowed as he entered the central courtyard. From high above, Ashlock could see Diana start to move from behind his trunk. But to Ashlock's godlike eyesight, she seemed to shimmer in the light as if her skin had turned to liquid. Mike noticed Diana emerge from behind the tree. "You aren't Stella." The words were caught in his throat as a second Diana appeared from one of the doors a few meters away that led to the training courtyard, causing Mike to stumble back. And then a third from behind a supporting pillar, and a fourth from the herbal garden entrance. Chapter 26, Ascension. A dense mist blanketed the courtyard as over 10 water clones of Diana emerged with sinister smiles. Mike reacted instantly, creating an area around him that froze the mist, transforming it into snow that swirled around him, eventually forming a blizzard. White flames drifted from his hands and joined the torrent, creating a seemingly impenetrable wall around him of snow and flames. His eyes darted around, and he held his sword in a ready position across his chest. Visit novel.com for updates. Haunted laughter echoed through the mist as shadows encircled Mike. They waited patiently, just outside his strike range as they laughed, mocking the man as if he were a goldfish trapped in a bowl. Crazy bitch. Mike clearly felt the insult and decided to go on the offensive as the laughing shadows were grating on his nerves. A javelin of ice that looked sharp enough to impale steel formed overhead, hovering ominously like a waiting warhead with the blizzard still raging. "Take this." Bringing his hand down that held the runic shield as if he was throwing something, the javelin of ice shot forth, slicing through the flames and ice with a horrifying speed at one of the shadows. From his viewpoint above, Ashlock could see everything. The mist was child's play before his A-grade skill. The shadow that Mike had attacked was just a shadow in the fog. The clones had dissolved into puddles and traveled along the floor in streams toward Mike. Ashlock didn't plan to take a backseat to this. Even if Diana was strong, it was still a bad matchup. She relied on water-based techniques, whereas the Winterwrath family employed ice-based ones. A natural counter. Ashlock waited for the perfect time to strike as his roots remained patiently under the thin soil cover. Conveniently, Mike didn't seem to want to move and was standing on a patch of grass rather than the runic formation, so Ashlock could cast Devour without issue. Seeing the shadow die from his attack, Mike grinned and shot out 10 more miniature icicles, each the length of an arm. They carved through the mist, and the shadows fell one by one. What a waste of chi. Ashlock couldn't hold back his critique as, from his perspective, Mike looked irrational, wasting chi on attacking shadows in the mist that would never harm him. "I don't know who you are," Mike began, but he seemed to catch something in the corner of his eye that silenced him. A stream of water like a snake was meandering across the floor, coated in a thin layer of dark blue flames to resist the freezing temperatures of the blizzard encircling Mike. He slashed down at the threat with his sword, the blade coated in some kind of frost chi that instantly froze the water stream, and a second slash made it shatter like glass. "Sneaky bitch from House Reborn, heh?" He saw another stream approaching his left foot and obliterated it in short form. "Must be lonely knowing all your family is dead. Are you a lost little lamb, ag?" A jet of water slashed at his tendon, causing him to stumble forward. More and more streams crawled toward him like vipers. There were too many for Mike's one sword and shield, so after reflecting another water blade, he consumed a healing pill and roared. Land of eternal ice. The ground trembled as he lit up like a light bulb with white flames that poured out of him like mercury in all directions, and the second the liquid flames touched the ground, the fire morphed into solid ice, coating the soil in a deep freeze that stopped Diana's attack in its tracks. Mike sneered at the flash-frozen ground surrounding him for a few meters. The injury on the back of his leg had also healed, not even a scar remained. Some might think Mike had the upper hand, but it was evident from above that Diana was whittling him down. The blizzard surrounding Mike dissipated as the mist retreated and the laughing shadows reappeared. Mike brought his sword and shield up and hit them together. Come on, stop hiding and come fight. Diana was actually standing on the wall, directly behind Mike. A dagger lay lazily in her hand as she looked down at him with dull gray eyes. Diana didn't say a word to counter his taunting, only a thin smile emerged. Then, like an orchestra conductor, she channeled chi into the surroundings, and the mist began to morph and move. Mike spun around, detecting the source of the chi. Found you. He threw his sword at Diana, but it passed through. The illusion rippled with the frost-covered blade lodged firmly inside it. Within a second, the water illusion froze into a statue of ice and tumbled forward, shattering on the grass below. Ashlock was as surprised as Mike. Even he had thought the illusion was real. A figure flickered through the fog, and Mike barely raised his shield in time to block a savage slash of blue flames from behind. The real Diana had gone for a killing blow, but Mike had just about survived by the skin of his teeth. Mike grinned as Diana found her blade frozen to his shield. Gotcha now. There was a brief flash of panic on Diana's calm face, and Ashlock decided it was time to make his explosive entrance. Casting Devour with all his stored-up chi, the ground cracked. His inner lake rippled as stored chi was funneled into the skill. Black vines as thick as one's forearm erupted from the ground with such force it was like a dormant kraken had awakened and decided to swallow its foolish prey. Mike's eyes bulged from shock as black vines came up all around him in a shower of cracked ice. He cast aside the shield with Diana's dagger frozen to it, summoned 2 blades from his spatial ring, and with a twirl, he cut all the vines in one go. They were severed easily and fell to the ground. But little did Mike know, the skill didn't end until the target was dead or Ashlock ran out of chi. More came. He cut them with increased vigor while deflecting Diana's second attack from his blind spot. The angle was awkward, so he stumbled, and a luckily placed root coiled around his foot, causing him to faceplant into the frozen grass with a groan. He tried to push himself up, but it was futile. Vines sprung from below and coiled around his waist and limbs, dragging him down. He screamed, white flames burning the vines, but with his ice gone, Diana could move freely. No, stop. Wait, I came for Stella, not you. Diana bent down before him, and with a broad smile, she cleanly decapitated Mike in one swift strike. As Ashlock's vines tightened around the corpse, the bone snapping made Diana lose her composure for a second. Oh, you gluttonous tree, can't you wait a darn second? I need to loot the corpse. She tried to pull Ashlock's vines away, but they kept coming and practically mummified Mike. Ashlock could only chuckle to himself as he watched the squatter struggle. If he could cancel the skill, he might have thought about it, but it was uncancelable once it started. At least let me grab the spatial ring. Diana fished through the coiling vines, and her eyes lit up when she saw a hint of gold. Using all her strength, she pulled 2 vines apart and yanked the golden ring from Mike's still warm finger. She fell back on her butt with a grunt. She then lay on her back and looked at the evening sky while holding the ring up. Got it. Only the sound of shifting vines and Diana's heavy breathing filled the empty courtyard. Plus 10 SC. Ashlock metaphorically frowned at the notification. Why was it only 10 credits? He gained at least 100 when he killed cultivators of a lower level than this guy. Did the system break? Requirements for the Soul Forge realm have been met. 9th Chi realm, 100%. Suitable white soul core element ice absorbed, placed into storage as cultivation stage is at 100%. Hold on. White soul core. Was that from the body I just consumed? Is that why I gained no SC? Because I didn't absorb the cultivator's soul core? Commencing upgrade to Soul Forge realm, 0%. Use free white soul core? Or random draw with 134 credits? Was that even a question? What kind of tree used ice abilities? Frost and fire were the natural enemies of all trees. Just the thought of the winter was enough to make Ashlock feel sleepy and want to hibernate. Random draw. Ashlock shouted to his system, and the screen flickered away. White soul core consumed, plus 200 SC. 324 credits used, forming new soul core. Ashlock waited with immense anxiety. Truthfully, he could think of some worse options than Frost, but trying to combine his vines that moved with sap and Frost Chi would be a hard combo to pull off. Amethyst Spatial Soul Core created. What? Entering sleep mode. Chapter 27, Heaven's Wrath. Upgrade complete, deactivating sleep mode. Ashlock awoke to a raging storm, freezing rain pelted his scarlet leaves and drummed on the pavilion's black wood roofs while turbulent winds made his branches sway. Lightning flickered through the clouds above, followed by thunder so deafening it made the entire mountain tremble. Relishing in the storm for a second, Ashlock looked at the clouds above in a daze. His body felt all kinds of wrong. It was like he had been stretched in his sleep and his blood replaced with a gas. How long had he been asleep? What was happening? Before he could summon the system to find his answer, a blue bolt of lightning descended from the heavens with wrathful fury and blasted into one of his thicker branches. A flash of light blinded Ashlock's spiritual sight, followed by a burning sensation. Warning, Wrath of the Heavens invoked. Ashlock felt ungodly pain, as if someone was pressing his finger onto a burning stove. Fuck's sake, not again. Is this a tribulation for reaching the next realm? What happened to my B-grade lightning chi protection? Checking his body, the distraught tree came to a terrible realization. It's already active. And it still hurt this much? Why is this lightning so much stronger than last time? In a panic, Ashlock felt for his inner chi lake, but it was gone. In its place deep inside his trunk was a light purple crystal that looked just like an amethyst. It was around the size of a human head, but the amount of chi stored within it was terrifying. So this is what the Grand Elder detonated to produce that terrifying supernova. It does feel like I have a bomb inside me ready to blow at any time. Feeling the chi in the air getting fierce, Ashlock decided to coat his trunk and branches with as much chi as possible for preemptive protection. Bring it on, you cosmic bastards. Nothing will stop me from eating all these cultivator fuckers. Much to Ashlock's dismay, his taunting would appear rather effective as another lightning bolt came from an odd angle and struck his trunk directly, just below his branches. But this time Ashlock was prepared. Lilac-colored flames flickered to life across Ashlock's trunk and absorbed most of the lightning's power, and his lightning chi protection handled the rest. Ha 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 ha. I have my own flames. Ashlock couldn't contain his excitement seeing nothing but a burn mark on his black bark instead of a gaping hole filled with fire like last time. This was evidence of his new power. Sadly, it seemed he had lost a branch to the first attack, but with his new soul core, perhaps he could make it through this ordeal. And then the hopeful tree saw the entire sky light up as golden bolts of lightning descended upon him all at once. His soul core trembled as lilac flames roared to life across his body, and he became a column of flame that reached for the skies. Then, as a lightning bolt came near, the fire flicked out as if slapping the god's wrath away. At first, it was easy, but as this continued for hours, it became harder and harder to resist. After each strike, Ashlock was just about ready to give up. He felt lethargic, and his flames had died down to just a whisper of their previous vigor. But then the thunder ceased, the clouds parted, and the sun's golden rays gave the young tree a new lease on life. Heavenly tribulation survived. Damage calculated at 7%. Hell, only 7%, what a piece of cake. Ashlock shrugged off the memories of him screaming in fear after the 10th round of lightning strikes came and decided he would never think of them again. Repair body with credits. Yes/no. Hell no. Ashlock mentally smashed the no option. You scammed me enough last time. I will sleep the damage off. And with that, Ashlock drifted off to sleep. Diana leaned on her sword implanted into the ground and frowned at the mysterious tree. She had just witnessed the tree fight off the most rounds of heavenly lightning she had ever seen, and it somehow survived the tribulation, mostly unharmed. A few charred branches lay at its base, but compared to the hundreds it had now, it was a small sacrifice. Diana dislodged her sword from the wet mud and felt its weight in her hand. Could she have survived such an event? Diana's grip around the sword tightened as she bit her lip. No matter how Diana imagined it, her chance of survival was nil. Th.e. Most up-to-date novels are published on N0velj and co/m. Hell, the tree couldn't even dodge the strikes like she could or pop lightning resistance pills. It had just taken them on the chin, defending with nothing but its newly awakened first-stage soul fire, which Diana noted was lilac, the flames of space. A rare and heavily sought-after soul fire type. With a sigh, Diana decided to inspect the tree. As she walked, the wet grass squelched underfoot as she circled the perimeter. Remnants of golden lightning arced between the tree's branches. She reached out a curious hand, and like a coiled viper, the streak of heavenly lightning lashed out at her. Diana easily thwacked it away, but it still made her palm numb. Looking at her tingling hand and then back at the tree that lorded over the courtyard, Diana couldn't help but think of the first week she arrived here. After they had double-teamed that winter wrath vermin almost a year ago, the tree had entered some type of hypergrowth, which was simply impossible. The tree had grown taller daily, with its branches spreading in all directions. By now, the entire central courtyard was under its canopy. But trees grow all the time, and the ambient chi had been rather dense, so that might have been explainable. What didn't have any explanation is how the tree formed a soul core and invoked the wrath of the heavens, an event that was usually reserved for star core cultivators. What could the tree possibly be doing that could cause heaven to defy its existence? Was it tapping into a forbidden power left over from before the gods? Shaking her head, Diana turned on her heel and headed back to the training courtyard with determination. She refused to be outdone by a tree of all things. A week later, on a quiet afternoon, a slothful tree awoke feeling much better. Ashlock looked up and was grateful for the clear blue skies that didn't want to kill him. "Well, this is new," Ashlock remarked as he looked around the empty courtyard. The runic formations were still there, but the ambient chi that had been so dense when he fell asleep was all but gone. More importantly, Ashlock hadn't noticed it last time due to the immediate situation, but he had grown while he slept. A lot. If he had been around 10 meters tall before, he was now triple that, and his point of view had followed. Now, without using his Eye of the Tree God skill, he could see into the pavilion's smaller courtyards as the walls no longer inhibited his sight. As he surveyed the vast pavilion, Ashlock spotted a familiar girl who was hard at work practicing in the training courtyard. Her sword danced between the training dummies with unrestrained fury. Her short black hair was drenched with sweat and clung to her face, but she seemed unperturbed as her dark blue flames coated her blade. Ashlock noticed the wall of the training courtyard was still destroyed from the Grand Elder's explosion, but the red vines had grown across. Now they may grow fast, but that was disturbing evidence that a lot of time had passed since he had fallen asleep to create his soul core. Usually, Ashlock would open his sign-in system first, but this time he decided to check on his personal information. The system had said the upgrade was complete. So he wanted to see if that was true. Demonic Spirit Tree, age, 8. Soulfire, first stage. Amethyst, spatial. Skills. Finally, Ashlock wanted to cry tears of joy. The system no longer regarded him as a mere sapling but now as a full-fledged tree. Also, he was 8 years old. That was a terrifying thought. Time sure did blink by as a tree compared to when he was human. However, there was something even more impressive. Ashlock gleefully looked at his upgraded realm. He was now in the same realm as Stella and Diana, the soul fire realm. But my soul core element is a bit unusual. Ashlock frowned. He was hoping for something a little easier to use, like nature or earth, but if there was one thing he had on his side, it was time to learn. Spatial definitely had a lot of applications, and for someone who couldn't move, the prospect of teleportation or crossing great distances through portals was thrilling. I have never heard of a teleporting tree before. Ashlock calmed down. He knew he was getting ahead of himself. Baby steps. Figure out how to use your new soul core first. Then teleporting tree. Maybe. Discarding the thoughts of his future world domination, Ashlock focused on his new powers. Can I use chi outside of my body now? He had manifested the lilac flames to fend off the tribulation, but that had been on his own trunk. So the question was, what could he do with his new flames? All the cultivators I've seen so far have used their soul flames to empower swords. Unfortunately, I don't have a sword. Ashlock looked around his enormous body and naturally found himself at his leaves. They were blood red and about the size of a human hand. If someone looked closer, under the sunlight, they would see the thin black veins that went throughout the leaf. Now to the unimaginative, they were just simple leaves, but to a tree with a dream of slaughtering pesky birds that overstayed their welcome on his branches, they became potential ninja shurikens. Ashlock concentrated and singled out a leaf. Chi rushed through his vast network of branches, and a second later, the leaf became ablaze. Okay, so far, so good. But now was the troublesome part. How can he detach the leaf? The leaves were like fingers to him, connected firmly by a stalk. Just because others could pluck them didn't mean he had a way to instantly sever the connection himself. In autumn, most trees' leaves would turn brown and fall off, but mine have never fallen off. Am I cursed as an evergreen tree? Ashlock pondered for a while but couldn't find another way. It felt like he was trying to make his fingernail fall off with nothing but his mind. Deciding there was no other choice and not willing to let his dreams of leaf projectiles die, Ashlock summoned his sign in system. Idolatry daily sign in system. Day, 3148. Daily credit, 302. Sacrifice credit, 0. Sign in. 302 credits should be enough to get me a B grade draw. Ashlock couldn't see how being able to throw his leaves at people could be higher than a B grade, so while praying to the gacha gods for their blessing, Ashlock signed in. Sign in successful, 302. Credits consumed. Unlocked a B grade skill, Root Puppet. Root Puppet. Ashlock could tell it was far from what he had initially wanted, just from the simple name. But as the information entered his mind for its uses, Ashlock felt a whole new world of potential open up to him. The skill allowed him to control corpses temporarily. Could I use this for communication? Chapter 28, Heart Demons. Root Puppet B was a rather odd skill. From the initial snippet of information provided by the system, Ashlock summarized that it was basically necromancy but worse in every way, but if there is one thing he had learned through his life with the system was not to underestimate its skills. It should allow me to control a corpse like a puppet. Ashlock could already think of many applications, such as a possible way to communicate. Right. Step 1 is to get a corpse for the skill to use. Ashlock looked around but quickly realized a problem. How can I get a corpse? Early the following day, there was a shriek followed by a thud as an unlucky bird took a flying dagger to the face. Diana approached the bird, pulled free her blade with dull eyes, and got to work stripping the corpse of its white feathers and meat. Her stomach was grumbling, which meant she hadn't eaten in at least a week. Absorbing chi offset the body's natural need for nutrients for a long while, but eventually, that nutrient debt would have to be paid back in full. A rather fat one today. Did it escape from the rebuilt Darklight City? Diana mused as she skillfully removed the organs, ignoring the rancid stench from the blood that sprayed on her shirt and jeans as she dug deeper with her blade. Wiping the sweat from her brow that had accumulated from a week of training, Diana pushed the blob of removed organs and stripped feathers to the side. Then picking up the bird, she felt her soul core hum to life and dark blue flames surged from her palm. Unfortunately, the fire she produced was not inherently hot, but the chi in her flames reacted violently with the chi left inside the bird's meat, causing it to sizzle. As Diana watched the cooking bird hanging by the neck from her hand, she couldn't help but tighten her grip and bite her lip in frustration. She hated to come to terms with it, but her talent was holding her back. Even though she trained every day for every possible second of the last year while in this courtyard, she hadn't progressed a single stage. The lack of progress was both disheartening and alarming. How could she reach the Star Core realm before the Grand Elder exam if she didn't grow after an entire year? She still had 3 stages to go and a heavenly tribulation to defy. Was she truly this untalented? Fated to remain forever stuck at the 6th stage of the Soul Fire realm? She had trained night and day in the family's best facilities throughout her childhood and was showered with enough resources to create a small sect. Yet, she was still average compared to the other scions of houses, at least. Of course, compared to her cousins, she was leagues ahead, but that wasn't good enough. The smell of succulent cooked meat tickled Diana's nose, breaking her from the depressing thoughts plaguing her mind. She just felt so angry that she wanted to scream. Diana paused with the steaming bird still in hand as a terrible realization dawned on her. I have heart demons holding me back. Why? Closing her eyes and checking her body thoroughly, she confirmed her suspicions. Her chi had become slightly corrupted at some point, causing a bottleneck. Diana narrowed it down to 2 potential causes. The most common reason for heart demons was the overconsumption of beast cores. Too many led to a quick rise in power but an impossible bottleneck to form. That eventually drove the cultivator insane. Diana thought back and confirmed that wasn't the case. She had been meticulous about her consumption even with her lust for power. So she must be suffering from the other cause. Some regret, trauma, or mortal greed had been ignored for far too long and left to fester in her heart. Diana absent-mindedly tore the bird's leg from its socket and bit into the flesh while thinking. Analyzing oneself analytically or from another person's perspective was hard. Her flaw could be any number of things. Her own inferiority, being called a failure and compared to her brother all the time. Condemned to death by her father with a suicide mission. Now that Diana thought about it, there could be any number of reasons for her heart demons. Her life had been rough considering her privileged position. Some time passed and Diana had her fill of food and didn't feel like starving to death anymore. Half the bird still had meat on it, but she felt too lazy and miserable to try and store it, so gathering up the clump of organs and feathers, Diana dragged the carcass to the central courtyard. Diana wasn't sure why she felt compelled to feed the tree. A part of it was simply for entertainment. Watching it devour corpses was at least something to pass the time. But if she had to be honest, the main reason was so she didn't feel guilty about squatting here. Watering, or in this case feeding the plants, was the least she could do for Stella. Maybe she won't hate me then, Diana grumbled as she entered the central courtyard through a spiderweb and dust-coated doorway. She almost sneezed due to the dense dust cloud that was visible in the morning sun. The red vine peak had fallen into complete disrepair, which was to be expected when a building that needed hundreds of maids to be functional was abandoned for so long. Diana debated cleaning up a little. Her water-based techniques could alleviate some of the dust, but she was too exhausted and drenched in blood to care for such a thing. Instead, she focused on the demonic tree that dominated the central courtyard, casting a great scarlet shade over most of the pavilion. Watching the chi condensing around the tree due to the runic formation was fascinating. Chi was sucked into the tree's thousands of leaves every few seconds and dispelled back into the surroundings as if the tree was breathing. Still no poisonous berries growing on your branches. What an unusual demonic tree, Diana said as she crossed the runic formation surrounding the now massive tree and stood before a patch of grass encircling the tree's base for a few meters. Through some trial and error, she had discovered this to be the best place to leave offerings. Here, you glutton. Diana dumped the bird carcass with the lump of organs inside and decided to enjoy the mild afternoon weather while lazing on the bench. A while passed, but Diana didn't hear the usual noises of the tree consuming its meal. Is it sleeping? Opening one eye, Diana looked to the side and saw an unusual sight. A single thin black tree root Diana had almost mistaken for a snake slowly broke from the dirt and approached the carcass. Curious, Diana got up from the bench. She didn't dare get too close and instead stood at a distance and let the tree do its thing. It had taken an entire day, but luckily to end Ashlock's misery like a kid on Christmas denied his presents, Diana had been considerate enough to bring him a body to experiment on. His lack of agency was somewhat infuriating, but he had to remind himself it was only temporary. Every day that passed, he became stronger and stronger, and with the nearly limitless potential of his spatial soul core, he was excited, but that utopian future was still a ways off. Luckily, it may not be perfect, but his new skill gave him some hope. Now that he had a corpse to practice on, Ashlock eagerly activated root puppet chi surged from his soul core into the depths of his trunk, down one of his larger roots, and then paused right below the corpse. Then a thin root grew off his main root like a branch and snaked through the soil toward its target a few centimeters above it. So far, so good. Ashlock hummed to himself as he controlled the thin root like an extra limb. Now, according to the skill, I need to get as close to the creature's center as possible. Finding the best point of attack, the black root approached the bird's rib cage. It snuck through a gap of missing flesh that Diana had eaten and was now inside. Okay, now to take control. Ashlock made the root's tip slit open and thousands of hair-thin threads emerged. They slowly crawled through the bird's carcass, connecting everything like an intricate spider web. The threads intertwined with various muscle tissues. The organs were held together in a clump in the center, and feathers stuck out in random directions. It was an absolute abomination. The bird was the size of a large dog, with its head hanging to the side connected by threads. Ashlock could see into its rib cage where a ball of organs dangled. Diana seemed weirdly unfazed by the whole thing, silently watching while standing a few meters away. Ashlock paid the squatter no heed and continued his experiment. With the threads in place, I should be able to control the corpse. Ashlock channeled some chi into the threads, and the corpse quivered. Like a very jittery robot or a zombie suffering from Parkinson's, the bird stood on its two clawed feet with as much grace as a drunken tightrope walker. It swayed from side to side and looked ready to fall over from a gust of wind. In its current state, the bird was near useless. Ashlock tried to make it squawk, but its mouth just gaped open and closed like a fish with nothing coming out, which was fair enough considering its severed windpipe. He also tried to make it draw something in the grass, but it just fell flat on its face. Walking was also just as unimpressive as its balance was downright horrendous. But considering the corpse's state, Ashlock was impressed that the grotesque thing could even stand. It was missing so much of its meat that it was more bone than flesh, and the bundle of organs dangling within its ribcage kept swinging around inside it like a counterweight. Yep, just as I feared, The skill is necromancy but without the magical touch to make dead things work when they aren't supposed to. Ashlock made the bird stumble around for a bit and noticed another issue. Wherever the bird went, the thin black root followed like a tether, and when the bird got too far, it tugged on the root like a dog chained to a kennel. Can't go far then. What a shame. Ashlock could still think of many uses for the skill, but it would require more testing, especially with a human corpse. Ashlock made his puppet flap its wings in a vain attempt to fly, which was sadly not successful as it lost its balance almost immediately and face-planted into the ground. Get the latest chapters on no/Velben.com. With its limited range and the terrible condition of the corpse, Ashlock deemed the experiment complete. Until a thought crossed his mind. If I channel enough chi into it, will it explode? Chapter 29, Stella's Return. Stella had a skip in her step as she walked up a winding dirt path that led to the base of Red Vine Peak. Stella's hands lazily swung as she looked up at her home that was so close. The titanic mountain dominated the skyline, with fluffy white clouds obscuring the pavilion built thousands of meters up on its peak. A part of her wished to rush back, but after spending a year slaughtering beasts out in the wilderness, the last thing she wanted to do was ruin this brief moment of calm. Stella took a deep breath of the fresh mountain air that was extremely pleasant this time of year to calm her nerves. She'd never spent so long away from her pavilion before, and she was no fool. With nobody to protect it, she half expected it to be burned to the ground or taken over by a rival family. Of course, such a thing was illegal under sect law, but what demonic cultivator ever cared for such a thing? She hated them all with a burning passion. Their nomadic way of life spent escaping the beast tides and backstabbing each other had taken everything from her. The last thing Stella wanted in this life was to be associated with these vermin who called themselves demonic cultivators. Stella sighed. She had got herself worked up again. A small weight shifted on her shoulder, and it yawned while stretching out its little limbs. Morning, Maple. Stella raised her hand and rubbed the fluffy white squirrel under the chin. Its little claws clasped her finger and showed her the perfect spot. Stella watched as Maple's golden eyes were shut in bliss, and the squirrel sprawled out happily on her shoulder. However, she still had many questions regarding the squirrel. Even though she had fainted, almost died, and slept in the deep wilderness with nobody to protect her, somehow she survived every time completely unscathed. The mysterious squirrel never lifted a finger to help in any fight, always letting her almost die and pass out, but when she woke up, the monster she had been fighting was gone, and Maple would demand head pats. If it happened once, she could ignore it. But it happened over 100 times. Stella removed the useless thoughts and just accepted that she was alive. Going out into the wilderness alone was an absolute mistake, but it had worked out, and she had become much stronger. Reaching the end of the dirt path and looking up at the thousands of steps leading all the way to the pavilion, Stella couldn't help but feel nostalgic. When she was a child and first arrived here, her father punished her once and made her walk up these steps with only her third chi realm cultivation. It had taken 8 grueling hours of climbing and made her appreciate the powers she now possessed. Flexing her now 7th stage soul fire cultivation, she couldn't help but grin at having gained 2 whole stages in a single year. At this rate, the chance of passing the Grand Elder exam in 2 years was an actual possibility. Purple flames roared to life, and streaks of lightning arced between her fingers, down her hair, and around her feet. Hold on tight, Maple. She looked to her shoulder, but the fluffy squirrel was gone. Why does he always do that? The first few times, the squirrel vanishing had scared the life out of her. But by now, she was used to the squirrel disappearing for hours, sometimes days at a time, only to return with snacks from God knows where. That little bugger is a bigger glutton than Tree. Stella was bubbling with excitement to see if Tree was doing well. Her inferior spatial roots showed their worth as Stella shot up the mountain steps in a flash. The steps blurred beneath her as she took 100 at a time, leaving a blurry trail of purple flames in her wake. Stopping instantly right in front of the pavilion's grand wooden doors, a sonic boom went off around her as the air rapidly filled the vacuum. With a giddy feeling, she quickly pushed the doors open and rushed into the courtyard, only for an explosion of lilac chi to send her stumbling backward. Her blonde hair, which was far too long, fluttered in the wind as she held up 2 arms to resist the incoming shockwave. A moment later, she squinted but couldn't see much through the cloud of dust except a glowing dark blue figure. Then, as the high-speed mountain wind swept the dust away, Stella became enraged. What is a raven-born bitch doing in my pavilion? Standing before Ashlock, shrouded in dark blue flames, was a dark-haired girl with a sword drawn. The girl looked over her shoulder and appraised Stella with her dull eyes, which only made Stella's blood boil. She felt her month of life and death training was being looked down on by some raven-born girl about to attack Tree. Stella channeled some chi into her golden spatial ring, located the perfect sword from her small collection, and brought it out. It had a simple design but was made of the best materials she could afford, as she still hadn't gone to Darklight City and sold the spoils she had acquired over the past year. Her 7th stage soul core hummed to life, and she felt that sweet power course through her inferior spatial spirit roots, empowering every muscle in her body to inhuman levels. With a single step, lightning crackled around Stella's feet, and she appeared an inch away from the intruder's face. The girl's dull eyes widened a little as Stella's lightning chi discharged at point-blank range, causing the girl to stumble back and groan in pain. Wait! Stella ignored her opponent's plea and reappeared behind the stumbling girl, her sword crackling with energy, raised high above her head in an executioner-style pose. With a shout, Stella brought the blade down with all her might but was surprised to find herself forced back as the girl smacked her sword away with her own, causing a clang to resound through the courtyard. The girl stepped back and raised her sword in a defensive position with dense dark blue flames flickering across its shiny surface. Compared to Stella's rather ordinary-looking sword, the girl's was clearly an artifact befitting a cultivation princess. "I am not here to fight with you," the girl said in a monotone voice, her expression never changing. "This is simply a misunderstanding." Stella tilted her head and debated activating her earrings as she glared at the raven-born girl. "What is there to misunderstand? Your despicable family slowly replaced my entire pavilion staff with your servants, and even your grand elder's brother was here pretending to be a gardener. Get the latest novels at no/v/e/l/ben.com. Stella sneered, "So when did you plan to murder me and take this mountain peak for yourselves? You are here to finish the job, aren't you?" "No," the girl shook her head, "I only learned of that plan from my father recently, and it's all meaningless now anyway." "You call my suffering and isolation meaningless?" Stella dashed forward, and the other girl quickly met her blade and didn't falter. Stella grit her teeth. Was this the difference between a demonic cultivator pumped with resources and herself being a resourceless self-taught cultivator? As the two exchanged a flurry of attacks, they sent cracks through the runic formation below. Chi swirled around the two cultivators as they battled with purple and dark blue flames. A dense mist began to fill the courtyard. And before Stella knew it, she had lost sight of the intruder. Stupid techniques. Stella cursed. She knew a few techniques, but they were all relatively weak as she'd learned them when her father was still alive to teach her. One was her favorite movement technique that she had already utilized a few times this fight. Unfortunately, her inferior spirit roots meant she couldn't learn real teleportation, but she could get close to the real thing so long as the distance was short enough. As the mist swirled around, her spiritual sight became hazy. Deciding to rely on her mortal sight, Stella's eyes darted left and right in search of the intruder from House Ravenborn. Just the thought of that family and how slimy they were made Stella's skin crawl. They had tried to pose as allies to her father, but their motives became clear when her father became a cripple and eventually died. They wanted to take over Red Vine Peak and didn't wish to care for her at all. If not for the patriarch's kindness in paying back the debt he owed to her parents by declaring her protection, Stella doubted she would be alive today. She still hated the old man, but she had to admit his help had protected her thus far. Stella crestfallen, "I come in peace." Shadows lingered through the dense fog and spoke all at once like a haunted choir. "Do we really have to fight?" Stella crouched low with her sword at the ready, and her eyes turned into swirling abysses as she looked around. "Let me slice your face up first, then we can talk." Stella sneered. If she hadn't enlisted help from one of her father's old acquaintances, the Ravnaborn Grand Elder's brother would have slit her throat in her sleep. That scheming bastard had even fed the demonic tree rabbits in the hopes that it would grow enough to dispose of her corpse. Which was ironic, considering his decapitated head ended up in that exact situation. Stella kept her wits about her as the mist dulled her senses, and the shadows moved closer and further away as if taunting her. As it started getting on her nerves, she felt something coming from behind with the senses she had honed in the wilderness. Desperately ducking forward with inhuman speed, Stella felt a sword whistle overhead. Turning to kick, it felt like her foot had hit a wall of wet mud. Confused, she looked past her waist and saw the girl collapse into a puddle of water. An illusion. How? Stella felt a sword hilt smash the back of her head, making her collapse face first onto the cracked runic formation below. Despite the hit's brutality, Stella was a cultivator and naturally didn't suffer much with her superhuman body. She raised her head and arm shrouded in flames, ready to defend the incoming sword slash aimed at her neck. But rather than a sword aiming for her life, there was an open palm, inviting her to take it. Your spatial awareness could use some work. But other than that, I am impressed. My name is Diana, by the way. Could we have a chat? Stella stared at the awaiting palm for a long time. Stella, what my family did to you was horrendous, but they're all dead now. House Ravenborn is no more, and I am just a rogue cultivator. If it pleases you, I will discard my family name. Diana moved her palm a little closer. I mean no threat to you, I promise. Fine, Stella grumbled and took the palm, allowing Diana to haul her to her feet. But you better not have hurt Tree in any way. Diana shook her head, quite the opposite, actually. Look how big it's grown. Stella looked up at the beautiful scarlet canopy that shrouded the entire central courtyard and was baffled. Tree. Is that really you? Chapter 30, Talking Tree. Ashlock wanted to intervene in the fight, but Maple had been firmly against it, shaking his little head and smacking his branch whenever he felt Ashlock's kiss flow toward his roots. Ultimately, this was a wise decision as Ashlock saw Diana help Stella stand on her feet, and neither girl seemed terribly hurt. As the two discussed, Ashlock thought about how disastrous it could have been if he had unleashed his skill on one of them. Read updated stories at n/o/vel/ben.com. I must remember that my devour skill only stops once the target is dead. So it's certainly not an ideal skill for breaking fights. Ashlock needed more skills. Every skill he gained had amazing uses, but he always found himself in a situation where another could have been helpful. Ashlock watched as the two girls approached his trunk, Diana opting to wait off to the side while chugging pills, likely to heal from Stella's earlier attacks. Tree. Hello. I've returned. Stella waved her arms while running toward him. Ashlock rolled his non-existent eyes, and even Diana blinked in confusion from Stella's complete change in demeanor and tone. The resurfacing of her childlike nature made Ashlock reminisce about the old days before all the drama of grand elders blowing themselves up and house politics. Stella plopped herself on the bench with a satisfied sigh and sprawled out as if she had just returned from working 2 shifts in a row and was drained. She then yelped as Maple suddenly appeared on her stomach, demanding head pats. Seeing her furry friend, the girl smiled and gave the little guy some attention. Maple, you were such a big help. Thank you for joining me. As Maple enjoyed the attention, Stella gazed at the scarlet canopy overhead. Tree, how did you grow so big? Stella raised her arms as if trying to reach for his branches. When I left, you were a small tree, but now you are this big. Are you really the same tree? She tilted her head and looked accusingly at Diana with a cold glare. Did you feed it something? Hey. I was not small. Calling a tree small hurts its pride, okay? Ashlock grumbled and realized a tactical lapse in judgment as he hadn't grown any fruit to drop on Stella. Actually, didn't I need to grow some acorns or something for Maple? Oops. Maybe he won't notice. Diana shook her head at Stella's question as she rested lazily against the far wall with her sword hanging from her hand. I did no such thing. I just fed it a bird every now and then. Just a bird every now and then, wait. Stella's eyes narrowed. How long have you been here? I thought you had just arrived. And what was the explosion of purple chi? Are you a dual soul core? Diana huffed to get the hair out of her eyes before responding with her usual dull, monotone voice. I've been here ever since my family got wiped out by the Winter Wrath and Evergreen family. So nearly a year. Looking to the ground to avoid Stella's cold gaze, Diana's hair fell across her face as she absent-mindedly shifted on her feet. And no, I'm not one of those chosen ones blessed with a dual soul core. She sighed, just an ordinary 6th stage soul fire cultivator. Blue flames flickered to life in Diana's palm, and she looked at it with a frown. With a plain blue soul core and inferior spirit roots. Nothing special. She closed her hand into a fist, and the flames vanished. What about you? Stella sat up and leaned against Ashlock's trunk. Why should I tell you anything? She scowled and crossed her arms. Do you think I forgave you just because you spared my life? Diana shrugged. You don't have to tell me anything. I was just wondering, since that attack you landed on me was so strong for such a young girl. 15 is hardly young. Stella snorted. Isn't it rather pathetic for a carefully raised princess of House Ravenborn to be at the 6th stage? Were you too busy being pampered and adored by your family to cultivate properly? Diana froze up a little and muttered under her breath, you wouldn't understand. No, I wouldn't, Stella snapped. You demonic cultivators took everything and tried to kill me too. Stella paused and let out a huff. Sorry. I am just venting. Could you give me a minute? I need to clear my head. Diana tensed her hand around her sword hilt and walked to the training courtyard without saying a word. Stella watched her go. And once Diana was out of sight, she laid back on the bench, and after a minute of rest, she began to talk again. Tree, I must tell you about the many adventures I had while you were sat here alone. I hope it wasn't too boring without me. Did you have some good sleep? I know you like to sleep a lot. Ashlock wanted to correct the girl and tell her he hadn't been left alone for a single darn second to sleep with so many people visiting and hanging around. Oh. Speaking of things you like, do you want some food? Hell, yes. Ashlock looked at Maple and yelled, give her a thumbs up. The sleeping squirrel's ear twitched, but it remained fast asleep. You little bastard. Ashlock could tell Maple was deliberately ignoring him. Stella seemed to be expecting an answer as she had her head tilted, so Ashlock racked his brain for a way to communicate. My latest skill requires a corpse, which Stella is yet to give me. Could I use my chi to signal yes and no? Deciding it was worth a try, Ashlock's soul core hummed, and his lilac flames flickered to life on a leaf in Stella's line of sight. To say her jaw dropped open was an understatement. Tree. You have a soul core? Stella leapt up and Maple went flying. Perfect. She asked me a yes or no question. Ashlock made the leaf flicker once. Hopefully, she understands. Stella tilted her head, eyes staring at the leaf intently. One flicker. Does that mean yes? Flicker the leaf again if that means yes. Ashlock silently praised the girl's parents for passing down their IQ to her. She was not only self-independent and good at cultivating, but she wasn't an airhead. Naturally, Ashlock flickered the leaf once again. Stella clapped her hands in delight. Communication. Now we are getting somewhere. She was practically jumping up and down like an excited bunny. Okay, flicker the leaf twice, and that will mean no. Ashlock complied and flickered the leaf with his lilac flames twice. I always knew you were a smart tree. Stella ran up and hugged his trunk with a smile. Ah. I wasn't crazy. You really could understand me this whole time. Ashlock flickered the leaf to say yes. Of course, this would get tiresome, but it was far better than dropping fruit on her head being his only form of communication. But if she gives me a corpse to work with, maybe I can write something in the dirt? Stella ran up to Maple, who had been tossed onto the ground, and threw him up into the air. Maple, tree can talk. Maple rolled his golden eyes, vanished midair, and appeared on Ashlock's branch a moment later. He then happily fell asleep. Much to Stella's bewilderment when she reached up and caught nothing but air. Should I toast him in my flames? Ashlock was seriously debating it. Just a light roasting. Stella collapsed back onto the bench with a pleasant expression and let out the most satisfied sigh Ashlock had ever heard. Ah, this is the best day ever. I am staying here forever, just you and me. Stella paused and looked in the direction Diana had gone. Tree, did Diana treat you well while she stayed here? That was a good question. Ashlock's opinion of Diana had drastically improved over the year, regardless of the snacks or not. Compared to many of the other demonic cultivators he had seen, she was tolerable, but only time would tell her real motives for being here. Did he trust Diana 100% as he did with Stella? Absolutely not. But Diana had treated him acceptably over the year. And Stella needs a human friend and teacher. That fight showed me that Stella lacks good techniques and fighting practice against other humans. Ashlock signaled yes with a flicker of his flames. Stella frowned. Do you like her more than me? Sigh. So. Jealous. Ashlock chuckled to himself as he flickered twice for no. He could almost see the wave of relief hit Stella as she saw his answer. It was only natural. Ashlock had practically watched Stella grow up from a terrified and alone young girl of barely 10 years old to the confident and powerful teenager she was now. Was he like a proud uncle? Stella huffed as she stared into the distance. I was being a bitch, wasn't I? Diana said her whole family died and didn't know of her family's plot against me. Ashlock decided not to comment. Although Diana was a bit older than Stella, maybe in her early 20s, Ashlock felt it was best to let them work it out between themselves. If Stella demanded Diana leave, which was perfectly reasonable considering Diana had broken into her home and lived in it for a year, then he would try and assist Stella in removing Diana. But he secretly hoped they could be friends. Stella had been alone for far too long, and her only friend being a tree was not healthy. He just wanted the best for her. I wonder if she will have kids one day. Ashlock chuckled. It would be funny to have a little Stella running around trying to steal my fruits. For some reason, that thought made Ashlock sad. What if Stella didn't reach the highest realm and descend from mortality? Would he take care of her children and grandchildren? Ugh, just the thought of it gives me a headache. Ashlock now hoped Stella didn't have kids and just focused on becoming immortal first. I should make some very dense fruit for her. That might help. Clueless of Ashlock's thoughts, Stella got up from the bench with a huff and started walking toward the training courtyard. Tree, I am going to speak with her. Stella looked over her shoulder with a cheeky smile, her blonde hair falling to the side, revealing those red leaf earrings he had gifted her so long ago. But I can't leave you hungry now, can I? Ashlock had never heard sweeter words. Stella's golden ring flashed with power, and corpses practically rained from the sky. Chapter 31, A New Friendship. As Stella crossed the central courtyard and approached the doorway that led into the neighboring training courtyard, the spring in her step slowly died, and the bubbling feeling in her chest transitioned into dread. Why did her happy reunion with Tree have to be tainted by the presence of a Ravenborn? Stella let out a long breath to calm her nerves. Diana Ravenborn was far stronger than her, that much was clear. The gap in their upbringing was too vast to overcome with pure cultivation. Why was life so unfair? Why did Diana get all the love and attention in the world while she was left alone in a desolate courtyard for so many years? Stella clenched her fists as the distant memory of her father patiently teaching her the only techniques she knew to this day slowly replayed in her mind. He would still be alive if not for the pressure upon her old man's shoulders to rush his cultivation due to families like the Ravenborn that set their eyes on his family's peak. His kind smile and energetic blonde hair that had waved and glowed in the sunshine were all she remembered of him. Stella closed her eyes for a brief moment to hold back the tears. She was a big girl now, and she had Tree to look out for her. Now wasn't the time to show weakness. Her father had always chuckled warmly and told her to be stronger than he ever was as he patted her small head and told her stories of his younger days. A breeze blew as Stella stood rooted before the ajar wooden door separating the courtyards. How was she supposed to face the daughter of the man that orchestrated her father's death with anything but wrathful fury and a venomous sneer? You are better than that, Stella, she whispered to herself as she played with the earrings that Tree had gifted her as a child to calm herself. Don't be like them, have an open but guarded heart. Taking a final deep breath, Stella pushed past the door, crossed the corridor, and entered the training courtyard. It was as she remembered it, apart from the destroyed far wall overgrown with red vines and the deep gashes left everywhere, likely from Diana's training. In the center, standing before a badly beaten-up training dummy, was Diana. Noticing Stella's presence, Diana looked over his shoulder, finished talking to the tree. Her voice was dull but not cold. Nevertheless, it lacked that sharpness Stella had expected. She knew how she interacted with Tree was abnormal, but she cared little for it. I have. Stella stayed where she was standing with her arms crossed. I see you have made a wreck of my training courtyard. Diana turned to face her. A sword lazily hung in her hand with the tip just above the ground. I admit the gashes in the floor were me, and I apologize for that. But the rest of the damage was from my father, not me. Stella raised a brow. Your father was here? Grand Elder Ravenborn? Was he looking for me? Shaking her head, Diana smiled. Nah, the old bastard went supernova. The Winterwrath and Evergreen families have taken over my peak and slaughtered everyone. Diana gestured to the hole in the wall. Want to take a look? Stella found her words unbelievable. It was hard to imagine such a titanic family falling to lower tier ones like the Winterwrath and Evergreen families. Although she had heard the Ravenborn family had been in decline for a long time, it was still weird to hear that the family that had plagued her mind for so long was just gone. Sure. Stella walked over and Diana led the girl across the training courtyard, kicking up sand as they went. Stella looked to the side and noticed Diana was a bit shorter than her and had a rather odd dressing style. The blood that stained the shirt wasn't helping the look, but it suited her. Maybe I should look into some new clothes, Stella thought as she glanced down at the ordinary black cloak she had worn for years that was tattered and needed a good wash. Diana flicked her finger as the two approached the hole overgrown with red vines, and a burst of blue flames shot out, incinerating the red vines in seconds. Once the smoke cleared, Stella was confused. Ravenborn Peak was still there, but the pavilion had been replaced with a grand palace of white stone. Even from so far away, Stella could feel hundreds of cultivators mingling around the palace. That is the new palace built by the Winterwrath and Evergreen families. Diana frowned. Right where my home used to be. Stella's eyes wandered to the staircase connecting the palace to Darklight City below. A constant stream of mortals and cultivators went up and down like worker ants. Diana pointed to the mountain's base, and Stella followed her finger. That's where my father went supernova. After that, the south side of Darklight City was destroyed and naturally rebuilt. Those humans are always eager to move to chi-dense areas for improved lifespan and health. Stella absent-mindedly nodded as she took it all in. Being told the family that had put her through so much was dead and actually seeing the evidence of their destruction with her own two eyes were two different things. This provided some closure but also made Stella feel a little lost. Not because she had a lifelong vendetta against House Ravenborn to fulfill, but rather what to do with the girl standing beside her. Stella could understand the surface level of her situation. Her family's dead, therefore, her home and economic backing have vanished. Diana is just like her, sort of. Of course, there were noticeable differences, but Stella could also see some possible bridges between them. Her almost instant defeat to Diana played in her mind, taunting her. She likely wouldn't have survived the wilderness without Maples's obvious help that she didn't wish to question. She needed techniques like Diana. Stella cast a side glance at her, and the girl was just staring at her old home with a distant expression. Do you miss them? Stella thought she saw a longing in Diana's eyes. Diana snorted, absolutely not. My life has been complete hell since you killed my brother. I was shoved into a position I didn't want and forced to compete with other scions despite my meager talent. There was a moment of silence and Stella hummed to herself, hum. And you didn't know of the murder plot against me? Diana rolled her eyes. I was like 10 at the time. Even if I did somehow know about it, so what? What could I have done? My brother was the one with power at the time, not me. Diana paused before adding, however, right before my father died, he sent me on a suicide mission to kill you. Diana gritted her teeth in silent rage. My father made an ultimatum. Either I kill you and suffer the consequences, or defy him and die by his hands. From that moment, I knew my life as a Ravenborn was over. Looking up at the sky, Diana let out a small sigh of relief, but with father dead, that burden has been lifted from my exhausted shoulders. I am now free of all that nonsense the family tried to shove onto me. Stella now had a much better picture of Diana's life and circumstances. It would appear that her assumptions about Diana's lavish life were wrong, but there was no way she would admit fault. Deciding to change the subject, Stella asked, so why are you here exactly? Fall 0W current novels on n/o/v/3l/b&co/m. Well, long story short, I came here before my father died on a mission to investigate what happened to Darren, my father's brother, and naturally found it empty since you were off in the wilderness. Diana gestured through the hole in the wall with a nod, so when everything went kaboom, and I barely survived a kidnapping from some asshole called Wayne Evergreen, I needed a place to lie low in case he came looking for me. Stella frowned. So you picked my home of all places. Yes, Diana said flatly as she looked at a beast core in the palm of her hand. With my money cut off, I had to live frugally. In just a year, I'm already down to my last beast core. Stella reached over and grabbed the beast core, crushing it to dust in her hand. We do not need these vile things that affect our state of mind and only lead to madness. Without these tainted things, we would cooperate like those in the Celestial Empire. But Diana's eyes seemed to glaze over as she looked at her now empty hand. I'm stuck at a bottleneck and on a time crunch for the Grand Elder exam. Without beast cores, I don't see how it can be possible. Stella reached over and put a hand on Diana's shoulder, which made the girl almost yelp. Diana, we are all on our own warpath through life with different hurdles to overcome. Don't compare yourselves to other scions and let negativity fester in your mind. You are the main character of your story, and so long as you wield the hammer of hope to demolish the obstacles standing in your way, there is no bottleneck you cannot overcome. Tightening her grip and meeting Diana's eyes, Stella muttered, if you don't believe in yourself, then who will? Diana nodded, her dull eyes lightening up a little. You're right. I shouldn't need beast cores to progress. If those in the Celestial Empire can rise without them, so can I. Stella smiled and nodded, exactly. I'm also aiming for the Grand Elder exam. So why don't we aim for it together? Sure. But does that mean I can stay here? Diana asked while scratching the back of her neck. I got nowhere else to go. Of course, if you teach me a few techniques. Seeing the girl nod, Stella tightened her grip again, but no going near or feeding Tree anything ever again. You hear me? Stay in this courtyard. Seeing Diana roll her eyes, Stella chuckled and walked off toward the central courtyard. Let's speak again later. I got an old friend to catch up with. Diana smiled at Stella's departing back but couldn't help but mutter under her breath, whatever you say, you crazy tree hugger. Chapter 32, A New Summon. Ashlock glared at the pile of corpses of abominations that was about a person high. He had been expecting a bit more, considering Stella had been away for a year, but it was still a substantial amount. Most surprising to Ashlock was that he could maintain his rationality in the face of so much food. The hunger was gnawing away at his brain, like a terrible itch inside his mind. But it was resistible. For how long? Ashlock didn't know, but he had an opportunity here. If I can resist consuming all the corpses at once, I can avoid an S-grade draw. The horror of the World Walker's alien gaze still sent shivers down Ashlock's bark. All I need to do is separate the corpses into smaller piles somehow. Ashlock could try devour each corpse one at a time, but he didn't trust in his ability to maintain his rationality for much longer. His instincts as a demonic tree to consume were overtaking his logical human mind. With the option of eating one corpse at a time off the table, Ashlock looked at his skill list, and his newest skill, Root Puppet, stood out. Identifying the most suitable corpse from the pile of bodies for his plan. Ashlock cast Root Puppet on a mutated gorilla. Only its top half was poking out of the heap, so he silently prayed that the corpse still had its legs intact. Using Root Puppet on the bird corpse a while ago confirmed a few things to Ashlock. Such as he needed an intact corpse with its flesh and bones, otherwise it's far too unstable and struggles to balance while walking. A thin black root broke up from the soil and snaked toward the gorilla monster's slightly ajar mouth. Now that Ashlock got a closer look, all the beasts in the pile could be mirrored to something from Earth but were also different enough from anything he had ever seen before to doubt this was another planet. For example, the gorilla monster had 10 clawed fingers per hand, for a total of 20. A third eye was also located in the back of its skull, but it was snake-like with a slit pupil. It took a few minutes to turn the large monster into a root puppet, but to Ashlock, it felt like days. Resisting the overwhelming hunger consuming his mind was more challenging than staying awake during the dark and cold winter. The pile of corpses shifted as Ashlock took control of the gorilla. It felt like millions of hair-thin roots had infiltrated every inch of the monster, and with the skill doing most of the work, Ashlock could make the beast rise. And that is where some new problems arose. In usual necromancy, the corpse would be powered by mana, but in this world, there was no mana, only chi. The beast naturally needed a type of fuel to stand and move around. The dormant beast core inside the gorilla hummed to life, but then cracks started forming on its surface as chi flooded the body. Finally, it stood on its hind legs while shrugging off all the other corpses. Ashlock could control it, although it still had that terrifying jitteriness that the bird had suffered from, which made complex movements a pipe dream. Ashlock directed the gorilla to shove the corpses into 3 distinct piles. If he had to guess, there were over 1,000 sacrifice credits up for grabs here, but he didn't wish to draw an S-grade or even an A-grade skill. Ashlock believed he needed a wider diversity of options, and by splitting it into 3 draws, he would hopefully achieve just that. It took a while, but the gorilla was incredibly strong, easily able to haul a few corpses at a time by skewering them with its many claws and dragging them into piles. It was at this moment the door to the courtyard opened, and Stella strode in with a beaming smile, but she almost missed a step in surprise as she noticed one of the corpses moving around. A sword instantly appeared in her hand, shrouded in her purple flames. Ashlock couldn't even react in time as she teleported and thrust the sword straight through the gorilla's chest. Ashlock tried to signal Stella that the gorilla was friendly by flashing his leaves with lilac flames twice, but she wasn't looking at him. Instead, her focus was entirely on the moving corpse. She twisted the sword before pulling it out and dragging out a good chunk of the gorilla's chest. Old blood poured from the wound, which clearly smelled foul as Stella's nose wrinkled up and she took a few steps back, bloodied sword at the ready. Then, keeping one eye on the beast, her other wandered to Ashlock, and her brows furrowed, seeing him flashing no with his leaves. No. She tilted her head in confusion, scrutinizing the beast once more. It just stood there, its eyes unmoving like a corpse. A black root snaked up its leg, across its chest, and into the side of its mouth. Are you controlling this thing? Make it raise its arms if you are. Ashlock complied, and the gorilla raised its clawed arms above its head, seemingly unbothered by the hole in its chest. In fact, Ashlock was curious how Stella had even killed the gorilla out in the wilderness since it lacked any surface wounds and the only weapon she used was a sword or daggers. A question for another time. Right now, he needed to calm Stella down. The gorilla slowly lowered its hands, pointed at itself, and then at Ashlock a few times with jittery movements. Stella lowered her sword, flicking it once to get rid of the sickly blood, and looked around at the 3 neat piles of corpses. She shook her head with a smile. "Tree, you have done something crazy again. What kind of demonic tree can control its food?" She couldn't hold back her giggling as she walked toward the gorilla. "And you made it organize your food. What a glutton, ha ha ha." She was practically wiping tears from her eyes at how ridiculous the situation was. Ashlock ignored her amusement at his expense since he felt his time with the gorilla was running out. The beast core inside was moments away from cracking. A mini explosion went off inside the gorilla as the beast's core shattered. Chi rushed out of the freshly made hole by Stella's sword and made the girl take a step back as the gorilla briefly faltered. Then Ashlock felt it. When he had used Root Puppet on the bird, it had demanded Chi from him to move, but due to the bird's tiny size, it was hardly noticeable. Whereas the gorilla was the size of 3 adult men. Ashlock felt an ungodly pull like a vacuum as Chi was pulled from his humming soul core and transferred to the gorilla. It's going to explode again, isn't it? Last time, when he had pushed so much Chi into the bird, it had exploded as his Chi reacted with the ambient Chi left in the bird's meat, causing a rapid decay, and finally, when the heat and pressure got too much, an explosion occurred. Stella watched as the gorilla lit up like a touch with lilac flames. Then, it stumbled to the side as its meat began to sizzle and fall off the bone. Stella quickly took a few more steps back and seemed to realize something. "Oh, Tree. You are the one who caused that explosion. I should have realized it sooner." Read latest chapters at n/OVELBinCo/M. Ashlock naturally cut the connection to the gorilla as soon as possible to avoid it exploding. However, he knew something like this might occur, so he'd left a corpse on the far side of the courtyard to be used later, as he still wanted to try and communicate with Stella by drawing in the dirt or on a slab or stone. The gorilla tumbled to the ground like a puppet cut from its strings, and the lilac flames died out shortly after. The smell of burnt meat filled the courtyard as the corpse kept sizzling for a bit longer. Unable to hold back his hunger anymore, Ashlock targeted the gorilla and the pile of corpses closest to it. Black vines erupted through the cracks in the broken runic formation and mummified the heap. The sound of snapping bones like fireworks echoed out as the black vines slowly wrapped around the pile like a coiling viper, crushing the corpses and secreting a dissolving fluid. Stella walked past the mess and slothfully laid down on the oak bench. "I hope you like the food, although most of it was caught by Maple since the monsters out there in the wilderness are far too strong for me." She let out a long sigh, "But hopefully, Diana will teach me some techniques, and then he'll be far stronger than I am now." Ashlock only half listened to the girl's ramblings as he relished in the rush of Chi traveling down the vines and into his trunk. "Maybe after all this, I will even go up a stage in the Soul Fire realm." Stella talked for a few more hours, but after a while, she got up to train with Diana, giving Ashlock some much-needed peace. Plus 500 SC. The notification came right as the black vines retreated into the ground. Ashlock still felt hungry with all the corpses waiting to be eaten, so he quickly summoned his sign in system. Idolatry Daily Sign in System. Day, 3149. Daily Credit, 1. Sacrifice Credit, 500. Sign in. Without hesitation, Ashlock decided to sign in. Sign in successful, 501 credits consumed. Unlocked a C-grade summon, Ash Spider. A C-grade summon? Ashlock was left scratching his non-existent head in confusion. Why had 500 credits given him such a low-grade thing? From his previous experiments, a C-grade draw was usually in the 100 credit range, whereas 500 credits were in the A-grade range. Thinking back, the only other time Ashlock had gotten a summon was the World Walker, a supposed S-grade for 2,600 points. Actually, what if the different reward types cost a different number of credits? Would summons cost the most, while items cost the least? Now Ashlock was once again left stumped. The system seemed so straightforward, but a few mysteries remained unsolved. Ashlock pushed those thoughts away and focused on his new summon, as he had never gotten the chance to use one before. How did summoning something differ from a skill, for example? He had no idea. Summon Ash Spider. Yes/no. Like the last time he unlocked a summon, a system notification floated in his mind. Naturally, Ashlock mentally pressed yes. A rift in space, this time much smaller, about the size of a human, opened above Ashlock's branches, and many gray-haired limbs crawled through. Chapter 33, World Tree. Ashlock had never been a big fan of spiders, so he could only question his decision to summon one. Ashlock looked up in total terror as a spider the size of a large car slowly crawled out of a crack in space. 8 blood-red eyes peeked through the gap, followed by many gray-haired legs. The worst part? The summoning was happening right above him. So the only place for the spider to go was down onto his branches. The thought of such a creature crawling around on him made him feel skittish and want to run. But it couldn't, he was a fucking tree. The courtyard door slammed open as Stella and Diana scrambled into the central courtyard with purple and blue flames lighting up the dark evening. They both had swords drawn, and their heads snapped upward toward the spider crawling from the rift. Not again. Stella murmured as she shuddered. What do you mean not again? Diana gritted her teeth, and mist began to gather around her. Tell me. This has happened before. Stella stood rooted in place, sword shaking in her hand as the memory of the World Walker played in her mind. But last time, the godlike creature on the other side just looked at me with its terrifying gaze before leaving. Is the tree doing this? Diana's flames flared up as she prepared to fight. Before Stella could answer, Ashlock flashed his leaf a single time to signal yes. Tree said yes. Stella lowered her sword so the tip pointed to the ground, and her flames died down a bit. It should be fine then. You can speak to the tree. Diana grumbled as she raised her sword. You trust it way too much. Do you have any idea what this implies? No. Stella tilted her head. Tree does many strange things, but I see nothing wrong with it. Like what? Diana glanced at Stella and saw her apprehensiveness to answer. I promise to tell no one, but this is way more serious than you realize. I need to know the full truth before I devise a plan to save Tree. Save Tree? Stella seemed bewildered. Is it sick? Ashlock was only half listening to the conversation between the two girls and hoped that Diana didn't cut him down or kill his new summon. I wasted 500 points on this, so even if the thing is creepy as hell, I will still find a use for it. But the news that there was something wrong with him was worrying. Had she figured out he had a system? Diana shook her head as half of the spider had crawled out of the rift. Not sick, but a possible threat to the world. Diana pointed to her jeans. You see this clothing? It's sold by the merchants. Ever heard of them? Stella had heard of them, so she nodded. Those tiny groups of super powerful cultivators that roam the wilderness in search of secret realms and then sell the artifacts they find at a ridiculous price, but I have never bought anything from them. Too expensive. Exactly. Diana cut Stella off as she spoke quickly. These clothes were part of a set made with artifacts found from secret realms monopolized by the merchants. They will do anything to enter a secret realm and take its contents. Diana then gestured to the rift in space above Ashlock, and that right there is an opening to a secret realm. Ashlock felt like he had been hit with a bombshell. Was he opening rifts to other realms? Attracting the attention of these merchants seemed like a terrible idea. Diana continued without pause since Stella still seemed apprehensive to reveal secrets. Have you heard about the secret realms and how they formed? Stella nervously shook her head and clenched her fists. She didn't like the idea of these merchants coming to take Tree away from her. No, I never really cared for the secret realms. Only Star Core cultivators can enter them and survive. Well, long story short, Diana said as the spider was almost through the rift. The secret realms are formed by worlds getting too close to each other for a short period, creating an overlap between them. However, this wasn't always the case. Ashlock tried to distract himself from the incoming spider by listening to Diana's exciting information. The knowledge that there was an overlap between worlds suggested the potential to hope or interact with other worlds. Maybe he could return to Earth one day, but did he even want to? His life on Earth had been cut short, but it was a rather dull life with few friends or family to care for him. Would I even be able to cultivate back on Earth? Does it have chi? Back before the current monarch realms walked this land, all the worlds were held together by a world tree. Diana said with a huff since Stella stared blankly at her. Stella, this is knowledge you should know. The world tree used to connect all the worlds with its roots, but it sucked up all the chi for its growth. So everyone banded together to cut its root and unleash the chi back into this world. Which led to the rise of the cultivators and also the beasts. What is your point? Stella was clearly baffled. Diana pointed at Ashlock and shouted, that is no demonic tree. It's a fucking world tree. Stella blinked her eyes and Ashlock's brain froze. Was he a world tree? Nowhere in his system did it suggest that. On the contrary, it clearly states that he is a demonic tree. But his system had to have come from somewhere, and so did the items and powers he gained. Did I obtain Stella's earrings from a secret realm? Did I pull it through a rift in space and into my inventory? Ashlock had no idea what to believe anymore. Stella rubbed her temples. So Tree is a baby world tree, and merchants may wish to take him away to gain access to the secret realms. Diana nodded, but not just that. Even the Celestial Empire will want to chop him down. The birth of a new world tree signifies the end of the cultivator era. Now, this was just getting out of hand. Ashlock highly doubted he would cause the end of an entire era and ruin the world. But it gave Ashlock some ideas about his system's origin and why he might be a man stuck in a tree. Let's think. I consume the chi from beasts and people, and in return, I get points I can use to summon things, which I now know are likely from secret realms or gaps between worlds. These new skills, items, and summons help me grow, so I can acquire more points to grow even bigger. Maybe he was a world-ending tree. Ashlock looked up again and saw the spider had finished coming through the rift, but if he looked really closely, he could see a tether of chi, as if the spider was being dragged through the gap with a leash. With a pop, the rift in space closed, and the spider fell and landed heavily on one of Ashlock's many branches, causing the branch to bend slightly and groan. Holy shit, it's heavy. The spider was the size of a car and weighed as much as one. Yet, surprisingly, it didn't feel as weird as Ashlock had thought, perhaps due to his bark's lack of sensitivity to something as delicate as hairs. Instead, all he felt was 8 points of weight spread out over a few branches. Name summon. Name. Ashlock stared at the prompt for a moment. What was an appropriate name to give to a car-sized spider that had been pulled from another dimension? I will give it something normal to remove how monstrous it is. A few generic names flashed through his mind, but a particular name seemed fitting. Larry. Ash Spider Larry has been summoned. The knowledge of how summons worked flooded Ashlock's mind. He had hoped the creature was something he could summon over and over by spending chi or daily credits, but after the knowledge from Diana, the fact that it was an actual living creature that, once dead, was dead forever made sense. He had literally made the system open a rift, dragged some poor creature from its home, and placed it under mind control. Larry, I will take good care of you, my very creepy-looking but fluffy new friend. Ashlock cast his sight away from the spider and tried to pretend it was a cute dog. The spider stood there, motionless as if it were a reanimated corpse. Ashlock tried to talk to it in his mind, but nothing happened. Do I need to do something special? Ashlock's non-existent eyes wandered to the thin tether of chi he could see connecting him and the spider. Focusing on it, he sent a command: take care of yourself and roam the mountain. Catch food outside if you need it, but stay close by. All new chapters on Nov.el.com. Ashlock could likely cut the tether and free Larry from the mind control, but he wasn't sure Stella and Diana could survive fighting against a rogue ash spider from some demon realm since it looked rather powerful, even though it was only a C-grade summon. The spider seemed to come back to life after receiving the order as it looked around. Its many red eyes landed on Maple, who was still sleeping, and it backed away while hissing. Maple opened an eye and glared at it, causing Larry to scurry off across Ashlock's branches with as much elegance as a dump truck. Stella and Diana both screamed as the massive spider threw itself over their heads while casting a looming shadow, landed in the training courtyard, and then made its way over to the broken wall to leave. Then a fantastic idea occurred to Ashlock, and he shouted down the mental link he had with Larry, and bring me some snacks too. Happy with getting rid of the creepy spider for a while, Ashlock turned his attention to the 2 remaining piles of corpses and cast Devour on the nearest one. I wonder what my next reward will be. Chapter 34, A Seed of Hope. Diana looked through the courtyard door at the departing ash-haired spider that had crawled from a secret realm. Just by watching it, she knew her chances of winning were slim. The sword in her hand felt like a toothpick compared to that monstrosity. It scurried across the training courtyard, fleeing through the hole in the wall with a quietness that didn't match its ridiculous size. She had seen wild boar that were smaller, yet could be heard from a mile away as they rampaged through the forests. With the spider gone and the eerie silence of the empty pavilion returning, the tree's vines munching on the next pile of corpses caressed her ears. The cracking of bones, squeezing of flesh, and the rustling of the vines coiling around made her stomach churn. Diana had often ventured into the wilderness and witnessed demonic trees in action. They were one of the more common spirit trees populating the wild. The only difference between spirit trees and any other typical tree was the ability to cultivate very slowly. However, most spirit trees never made it into the soul fire realm as their wood could be harvested and turned into long-lasting tools for mortals and even cultivators if the spirit tree cultivated high enough. So Diana had never seen a strong spirit tree before, as she never ventured too far from sect grounds. But even with her limited knowledge, she was certain demonic trees grew poisonous berries and slowly absorbed corpses around their roots by making the soil very acidic, controlling vines that came out of the ground, creating rifts to a demonic realm, talking with its chi. These were powers reserved for sentient, thinking creatures. Or a world's tree. Diana had heard tales of how before monarch realms ruled the world with their continent-spanning empires, there was no chi and no cultivators. It wasn't until the world tree, that spanned the cosmos with its roots infiltrating every world, was destroyed by the old gods that chi could finally flourish and give rise to a vibrant and alive world. Now it may be small compared to the world tree described in the legends, but too many worrying signs were pointing to its future prowess. Its growth was ridiculous, and its soul core element was worrying. Spatial, of the highest grade. The lilac flames were so bright and pure that it was almost impossible. Everyone's soul was slightly tainted, unable to fully grasp an element's Tao. But the tree, it had somehow fully comprehended one of the rarest and most powerful elements. Diana glanced at her own dark blue flames, showing her meager talent in the element of water. To her side stood Stella. Her purple flames had died down. She also had a spatial element, but Diana could also detect lightning Tao. So how had Stella come into contact with the heavenly lightning when she was still in the soul fire realm? Diana had too many questions, and Stella's lips were firmly shut in a slight frown, and her eyes filled with worry. With a long sigh, Diana relaxed her soul core and deposited her sword in her spatial ring. We need to get stronger, Stella, if we want to protect the tree. Diana saw the girl's eyes widen as she turned to her. Diana was a little annoyed looking up to meet the younger girl's eyes, but she had never liked high heels, so this was the fate she had to suffer. Don't give me that look. I'm a demonic cultivator without a family name. If I cannot become a grand elder, my future is bleak, to say the least, and I have nowhere else to go. Sorry, Diana. Stella diverted her eyes, looking back at the tree. Don't trust me yet. Diana smiled sadly. That is perfectly understandable, and I have no right to pressure you for answers. But could you please tell your tree friend to avoid summoning stuff from rifts? If a merchant group is nearby, it will be the end for all of us. Stella nodded, absolutely. Thank you, Diana. Just give me some time, and we can work this out. Diana could only shrug at the girl's words. In a way, Diana respected how tight-lipped Stella could be. That was a good trait to have. Diana turned on her heel and walked with measured steps back to the dark training courtyard. A dagger materialized in her hand, and she spun it between her fingers as her mind wandered. What would become of this? Ashlock watched Diana leave, and once she was out of sight, he summoned his system to ensure he wasn't listed as a world tree seed. Demonic spirit tree, age, 8. Soul fire, first stage. Soul core, amethyst, spatial. Summons. Ash spider, Larry C. Skills. Eye of the tree god A. Deep roots A. Language of the world B. Lightning chi protection B. Root puppet B. Get latest novel chapters on Nov elbj/nc/om. Transpiration of heaven and earth C. Chi fruit production C. Devour C. Hibernate C. Fire chi resistance C. Basic poison resistance F. Besides the new summons section that listed Larry, everything else was the same as usual. His race said demonic spirit tree, and there was no evidence of him becoming a world tree. Hang on. His race had upgraded from sapling to tree when he ascended to the soul fire realm from the chi realm. What could be higher than a spirit tree? World tree. Would it upgrade once he reached the next realm? And now that he looked at his soul core and skills, a spatial element for a tree didn't make a lot of sense, and he had skills like Eye of the Tree God and Language of the World. Aren't these abilities a world tree could have? They allowed him to see and understand everything within his realm of influence. Could he even understand beasts if they communicated near him? Even his cultivation technique was suspicious. Its description depicted him as the connection between heaven and earth, which wasn't far from a world tree's true purpose. Diana mentioned these secret realms formed because worlds drifted too close to one another and created an overlap. If I could get my roots through an overlap and anchor the worlds together, couldn't I become the bridge between worlds? Ashlock calmed down. He was getting way ahead of himself. Conquer Red Vine Peak first, then this sect filled with assholes. Then the continent, the world, and only then can I become a world tree and span the cosmos. Until this point, Ashlock had been growing stronger for nothing but survival. But now he had an end goal. Mortals strove for immortality, but that had been pointless to him as an immortal tree. Becoming a world tree is a great end goal. Ashlock was almost daydreaming of how many credits he could harvest daily if his roots spread worldwide. Tree. An almost mouse-like voice broke him from his thoughts. Stella had approached him. Her eyes were different as she looked up at his expansive canopy that loomed overhead. The affection was held back by a mask of seriousness with her hands clenched at her sides. Ashlock flashed his lilac chi through a leaf to signal he was listening. He had thought of trying to spell words with his leaves, but they were too sparse to achieve such a thing. Stella just stood rooted in place as she watched the leaf flicker. Her mouth opened and closed as if she struggled to get the words out. Words that Ashlock was fearful of. Why was Stella acting in such a way? Had Diana's words shaken her? Did the knowledge that he might be a world tree break the illusion of a friendly tree she had in her mind? Ashlock's mind raced as Stella stood there. A while passed before Stella gathered the courage. Finally, she looked up and held her arms against her chest. Tree, I'm sorry. I'm so weak. Tears brimmed at the edge of the girl's eyes. As I am now. I can never hope to protect you against the whole world. I need to work harder. Train faster. Ashlock was speechless. Was this girl crazy? She wanted to fight the whole world. The thought of Stella fighting everyone for him had never even occurred. How could he put such pressure on a girl who isn't even an adult yet? She should just grow up happy under his canopy and let him handle the rest. Stella reached up to her earrings with one hand and clenched a black-handled dagger that Ashlock recognized with the other. You gave me so much, but I have nothing in return to offer. I will go train so I will not be a hindrance. She didn't even watch his leaves frantically flashing twice to indicate no. Instead, biting her lip, she turned and left to follow Diana. A fire that Ashlock had never seen before flared in her eyes, the fire of passion. Ashlock stopped trying to signal Stella and let her go. Although her motives for strength were twisted, the end result she aimed for was ideal. He needed her to be stronger, but not for himself. In a world where a man riding a mountain-sized ice golem can turn up unannounced, and a beast tide that can wipe out an entire sect can come by, there was no way he could guarantee her safety. At least for now. Don't worry, Stella, for I am also weak. Ashlock returned his attention to the pile of corpses and decided to cast Devour on the third pile. He was going all in for his next draw. The training courtyard was filled with shouts and clangs of swords as ambient chi radiated off their fierce fighting. Diana and Stella trained hard throughout the night without rest. Ashlock wished he could watch, but he had to focus on his meditation technique. There was a large amount of chi in the corpses, and he could feel himself touching the next stage of his realm. The path to becoming a world tree was long, but every bit of growth mattered. As the sun crested the horizon, signifying the start of a new day, Ashlock felt a rush of chi spread throughout his body, one he was familiar with. Plus 902 SC. Ashlock glanced briefly at the points. Those had been expected, but the rush meant something else. He quickly opened his status screen. Demonic Spirit Tree, Age, 8. Soul Fire, 2nd Stage. Soul Core, Amethyst, Spatial. Sure enough, he was now at the 2nd stage of the Soul Fire realm. He could already feel the changes. His perception range was increased, his trunk buzzed with power, and his mind felt clearer than ever. But the feeling faded soon enough, becoming the new norm. Once Ashlock had finished relishing in his new cultivation stage, he turned to the sign in system. I wonder if it could give me some more techniques for cultivation and chi usage. Until now Ashlock couldn't only cultivate with his transpiration of heaven and earth technique, but actually throwing his chi around was beyond him. Knowledge about runic formations or arrays would also be useful. Ashlock could only pray that the Gacha gods would listen to his plea. His system was beyond powerful. Given enough time, he would accumulate all the items, skills, and summons he could ever need. The only downside? It was randomized. Idolatry Daily Sign in System. Day, 3150. Daily Credit, 1. Sacrifice Credit, 902. Sign in. Yes, sign in. Sign in successful, 903 credits consumed. Upgraded Chi Fruit Production C- Chi Fruit Production B. What? Ashlock glared at the notification. What was the difference? Why had it cost 903 credits to just raise the Chi Fruit production up a grade? But then the knowledge the upgrade brought flooded his mind. He could now put seeds in the fruit, an option that had been missing from the menu before. Ashlock opened the menu with excitement, and sure enough, he could add a demonic tree seed into the fruit. It was time to build a forest of his own. Chapter 35, City Exploration. Ashlock hummed to himself as he could finally enjoy the pleasant autumn morning since the constant sound of fighting had ceased. Diana and Stella had taken a training break, and both passed out on the sandy training courtyard floor while gasping for breath in puddles of their own sweat. Stella's blonde hair was practically glued to her face, and Diana smiled as she rested. While the girls had fun training, Ashlock had spent the morning busy with his chi fruit production menu. When Stella returned home, he planned to begin production of his fruit again as she would need food, and now with its increased grade providing him with a demonic tree seed option, he was excited. Ashlock hadn't been a tree expert back on Earth, but even he knew trees had two ways to reproduce. One was through seeds, which had evolved over millions of years on Earth to be dispersed in every way possible, and the other was asexual reproduction, where the trees clone themselves through their roots. Can I clone myself? Ashlock knew for a tree to clone itself, it needed roots far away from its main body, and they needed to be in fertile soil. Otherwise, the cloned tree would steal resources from the original tree. But all my roots are stuck inside a mountain right now. Ashlock had been keeping an eye on his roots' progress through Red Vine Peak. Ever since he gained a soul core, the progress had increased by over 10 times, and it wouldn't be long until he reached the mountain's base. Perhaps I can try to create a clone of myself once I reach the base. Or will I need a skill for that? Ashlock grumbled to himself as he thought of skills. They felt like features locked behind a paywall to him, which was frustrating, to say the least. Anyway, back to the seeds. Ashlock scrutinized the menu that floated in his mind. He clicked on the option to create a new fruit, and the user interface flickered as it brought up a blank space. Selecting the demonic tree seed, a dark red seed with black dots appeared floating in the menu. Now, how do I want this seed to be distributed? Wind, water, and even animals can bring seeds away from the original tree. Ashlock could try and create a way for his seeds to be dispersed by the wind, but just from a simple look around, he realized that wouldn't be possible. There simply wasn't any space for another tree to grow up here as he dominated the sky, and the pavilion took up most of the land. The walls would also trap the seeds so they couldn't escape to the ground thousands of meters below. Deciding an animal eating the seed was the best choice, Ashlock created a perfect-sized fruit for a bird and grew them on his uppermost branches. They were bright yellow, tasted sweet, and even had a little chi. But the majority of the fruit was the demonic tree seed. Then Ashlock added just a tad of poison that would be hard to detect over the fruit's sickly sweet smell and succulent soul fire realm chi. It would be bad if the bird went and deposited the seed too far from me, so poison is the way to go. Happy with his new fruit, Ashlock created a few more that didn't contain poison and others too big for a bird to take, so the girls had a fruit to eat. His grand plan was for birds to eat the poisonous ones, die an hour later, and then the demonic seed could use the bird's corpse as fuel to grow. I could also ask Stella and Diana to take some seeds with them when they go out to the wilderness again. Ashlock mulled but then shot down the idea. He couldn't even talk, so conveying such a complex idea would be impossible. The corpse he had left to the side for trying to communicate still lay there. However, looking at Stella and Diana's condition, Ashlock doubted they wished to wake up to a monster trying to communicate with them. Maybe Maple could take some seeds for me. Ashlock found the sleeping squirrel and decided against waking up the furball that had made Larry scramble away in fear. Oh yay, Larry. Why don't I ask my new mind-controlled spider friend? Ashlock mentally focused on the black chi tether, it went in the direction of the town. Oh no. Ashlock was worried Larry had gone and feasted on some people, so he cast Eye of the Tree God and took to the skies. Instantly, he could feel the difference the single stage increase had on his view range. The very edge of a new mountain peak became clear in the far distance on the other side of the town. Yay, that is definitely not a town. The town devastated by the supernova was merely a slice of a sprawling city that filled up the valley. Even with his increased view range, Ashlock couldn't see the end of it. However, although it had been a year since the attack, Ashlock could still see large areas still wrecked. But the progress in reconstruction after only a year is impressive. Ashlock could see hundreds of men in brown robes lifting and hauling beams of wood, many times their size, over their shoulders, and Ashlock couldn't detect any chi from them. Mortals are that strong in this world. In a way, it made some sense. If a cultivator at the 9th stage of the chi realm could break a boulder in half with their bare fist, it only made sense that mortals who were eternally stuck at the 1st stage of the chi realm could still perform impressive feats. The ambient chi in the air seemed to affect all life on the planet. Ashlock had already noticed that plants grew faster than expected, so wouldn't that include crops? And if crops are filled with chi, wouldn't the mortals eating it absorb even a little chi every time? Ashlock had found it rather ridiculous how a civilization could sustain itself with superhumans running around, but if ambient chi made sickness rare and famine a near impossibility, wouldn't the world suffer from overpopulation instead? The vast city followed a similar theme as the park he had seen before. Chinese-style pavilions flanked cobbled streets with people going about their daily business. However, Ashlock could feel a sense of tension in all the people as they went about their lives, something he had noticed when watching interviews of people living in war-torn countries back on Earth. Cultivators in snow white and dark green robes wandered the streets as if they owned the place, pushing their way into stores and restaurants with their heads held high and hands clasped behind their backs. Ashlock noticed the main offenders were younger-looking cultivators who had apparently let their family's victory get to their heads. The occasional more senior cultivator would holler at them to act respectful to the mortals, but they would just run off like misbehaving kids. If there was one thing Ashlock hated, it was teenagers that thought they knew it all, so the whole thing left a sour taste in his mouth. After a few minutes, Ashlock found a particularly interesting pair heading toward the city's outskirts. Both were evergreen cultivators by their clothing, and they looked somewhat similar. Are all cultivators in a family related? In his brief overlook of the city, Ashlock found it hard to believe that he had counted hundreds, if not thousands, of cultivators roaming the streets of the vast city, and they were all part of just two families. As Ashlock was watching the cultivators walk, he saw a thin line of black chi. Larry. Ashlock raced along the line. It led him outside the bustling city and around the far side of the Reborn mountain. The sound of shouting and clanging of tools on stone filled the air. Is this a mine? Ashlock watched a stream of mortals coming out of an enormous hole built into the side of the mountain. Pickaxes and bags filled to the brim with silvery rock were in their hands as they marched in single file. A winter-wrath cultivator with many spatial rings on his fingers stood to the side on a raised platform. A clipboard was in his hands, and he gave the man waiting before him a once-over with about as much enthusiasm as a store clerk from Ashlock's previous life. Name. The cultivator said with a sigh. Barry Yale. A large man at the front of the queue answered respectfully. The winter-wrath cultivator held out his hand, and Barry handed him the sack filled with the silvery rock with a grunt due to its weight. The cultivator weighed the bag up and down effortlessly, and some white chi shrouded his hand. About 50 silver crowns worth of spirit stones. Next. The bag of spirit stones vanished from the cultivator's hands, and one of the many golden rings flashed with power before dimming. They are called spirit stones. Ashlock finally knew the name of that silvery rock found in his mountain. But how do they have so much? Each person here carries as many spirit stones as I find every 1,000 meters. Are there more spirit stones deeper down? Or is my mountain just deprived of resources? Ashlock felt he may have just stumbled upon the reason nobody cared for Red Vine Peak. Was it useless to the cultivators? Barry didn't move. Sir, under the Reborn family, that same bag fetched me 80 silver crowns at least. The winter-wrath cultivator tilted his head and sneered. His scarlet eyes flashed with amusement. Mortal, don't make this harder than it has to be, all right? You and I both know how this world works. Barry gritted his teeth and opened his hand. The cultivator's ring flashed, and 50 small silver coins appeared, which Barry quickly pocketed with a scowl before stomping off. Next. Updated chapters on novel.com. Ashlock watched as Barry made his way to a pathway and chose to go right, which was the opposite way from the city. As Barry walked down the well-trodden path flanked by trees with golden-brown autumn leaves, Ashlock looked ahead and saw a vast wall in the distance. It was constructed of gray stone, and Ashlock could see cultivators wandering along its top as they looked out into the vast wilderness, likely for incoming beasts. Between the back of the mountain and the stone wall was an expansive land overflowing with fields, dense patches of forest, and the occasional village nestled in between, consisting of only a dozen houses. A river flowed down from one of the mountain peaks, making it a scenic view. There was just one problem. Barry was walking into a patch of dense forest, and Ashlock could see the black chi tether that led him to Larry. Using his skill to move on ahead, Ashlock saw up in the trees a few meters into the forest was Larry. The car-sized ash spider was happily building a network of webs throughout the patch of forest and munching on an animal's leg. Larry. What are you doing here so close to the humans? I told you to go hunt in the wilderness. Come back right now. Ashlock tried to speak with Larry through the tether, but the distance affected the message. Larry looked toward Red Vine Peak but tilted its head in confusion. I never told Larry what counted as a snack, did I? Ashlock watched in dread as Barry entered the forest, unaware of the monster lurking within. Ashlock was ready to declare Barry a dead man. But then he saw the two evergreen cultivators he had noticed earlier trailing not far behind and entering the forest only a moment after Barry. Now Ashlock was worried for Larry,